Uh, by the way, can somebody pull besides Shelby pull it up on their phone just to make sure?
Look, yeah, we're live. I see it on the YouTube.
Oh, Carrie, can you or Shelby both? Can you pull out the? Can you see the chat on there?
I can see it on on the YouTube link. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. So both of you kind of monitor that, and if
yeah.
we get a little break, questions, whatever, you know how we do it.
We already have one. Hello.
All right.
Hello,
Hey, everybody,
hello.
welcome to the 2025 Banner Brackets Top 16 Reveal Mock Selection Show. Let's go around the room. I'm Tim Kruger. I was just going to facilitate, but we've got one member that's, I think, stuck on a plane somewhere, so I'll jump in for him. It was going to be Rocco Miller, but he'll join us later. I now Bracketville along with Dave Ullman.
Hello, everybody.
And we have a new member this year. Anthony, introduce yourself.
Yeah, Anthony Valentino, also known as Made for March on Twitter. Really excited to be a part of this, guy. So I appreciate the invite.
And Shelby.
Howdy, y'all.
I'll give anybody $5. They can guess where Shelby's from. And Graham.
Hey everybody, Graham Dorn, Graham Dorn Bracketology on Twitter.
And last but not least, Mr. Kerry Miller.
I'm just here so I don't get fined. Me and my whiteboard will be here all night.
Yeah, Kerry's got the whiteboard. Shelby and Kerry are kind of monitoring the chat. So you guys have any questions, any comments, whatever, throw them into the chat. We'll get started here. This will probably take, I'm guessing, 90 minutes or so, depending on how many arguments we have. But I think usually these go pretty smooth. So let me just explain what's gone on here so far. Much like we try and follow the NCAA rules, principles, and procedures as closely as possible. So what we have done is we have sent in what we'll do in March is just follow their procedure and send in a list up to 24 teams that we think are in the field. On this one, we did 16 since that's basically what we're picking, but we are going to pick 16 plus 4 that, just missed the cut. So everybody sent it in. If it was on everyone's ballot, we went ahead and put them teams in the field, which you can see on your screen right now. All the other teams got put over on the consideration board over on the side. So we ended up with 13 teams in the field: Alabama, Arizona, Auburn, Duke, Florida, Houston, Iowa State, Kansas, Kentucky, Purdue, Tennessee A&M, and Texas Tech. We now have 9 teams under consideration: Illinois, Marquette, Memphis, Michigan, Michigan State, Ole Miss, St. John's, UCLA, Wisconsin. When the night is done, we'll have 2 teams that won't even be considered. We'll have 4 teams that will be 17 through 20, and then all the rest will be in the field 1 through 16. So right now, what we're going to do is we're going to fill up the field of 20 teams, get to 20, and then we're going to start the seeding process where we'll seed lines 1, 2, 3, 4. We won't seed line 5. We'll just put those in as teams that were under consideration.
Hey Tim,
Okay.
Just a quick note that Rocco
Yes.
is in the waiting room.
Beautiful. Don't know why that didn't come up for me, but
He's in the waiting room.
I was going to mention it too, but I was waiting until you were done.
Yeah,
I thought
he's in the waiting room just chugging Let It Fry lagers.
all right, let's get him on here. Oh, takes a big load off my plate. Can't step in his shoes, man.
Get the Guinness flowing.
Rocco, are you there?
He's working on it.
Well, he's in there. He'll pop up as soon as he gets in here. So let me all right. So let me pull that back up again. Members of the committee, when you send in your list, make sure you send them in using the numbers only.
Are they numbered in alphabetical order?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
I will also have a sheet we'll put up when we're voting, and that'll have the 8 teams or 4, or however many we're voting on, and that will have the numbers on it as well. So it'll make it very easy. All right, so I think we'll get started. Rocco should be on here any minute. Go ahead and pick 6. We're picking 6 out of that consideration pool. So 6 of the 9 that you think should be added to the field. And then we will discuss those a little bit, and then we'll do a vote where we'll rank those, and the top 4 will get into the field. So everybody has my phone number, right?
Yep.
All right, so
Yep.
go ahead and text away.
Who sent it to the group chat? First fail of the
That's
whole
me.
thing.
Hush.
God, Shelby.
Not send it to the group chat.
Well, a little late.
We have a committee member out here trying to unduly influence other members on their votes.
I'm not offering anything for it.
Also, Shelby, what are you voting on?
The numbers I like.
No, you sent them in from the 2B seated. We're going from the 2B selected. We're getting 6 from the far right column. The consideration.
That's what I sent it from.
I'm seeing what Carrie saw, which is single digits, and I think it's
Yeah,
gonna be
we're not
double-digit
picking
numbers.
those.
Oh, okay. I thought it was 1 through 9 over on the right.
No, on the email, the numbered teams for mock reveal, he's got the
Oh, crap.
little list there of all the numbers. Yeah. I put the numbers in my spreadsheet so that I would not make that mistake.
But, I think this is a good point with the actual selection committee. Oftentimes, I think people are like, why did they meet for so long? And why couldn't
Yeah.
they pay more attention to some of these results? I mean, it's a committee. It's a lot of people, a lot of different movement. Sometimes we forget as, you get a group of people together like that, it just takes a long time to do pretty much anything.
Not only that, they'll say, hey, as they're voting, hey, can you put up Arkansas and so, because I want to take another look at them.
Hey guys.
Hey, Rocco.
Hey, Rocco.
Hey, good evening.
Your plane landed?
Yeah. I've been here for a little while, 3 hours. I just got a little lost with the Zoom link there. How's everyone doing?
Good.
How are
Good.
you?
How about you, Rocco?
I'm good. Thanks for asking. Appreciate it. Looking forward to this.
Hey, Rocco, how's it going?
Hey, Timothy.
Hey, go ahead and text on that under consideration, those 9 teams over there.
Uh-huh.
Pick 6 and use the numbers to just text those to me.
Okay. Numbers are in our emails, correct?
Correcto mundo.
Okay, then.
All right, so far I've got Dave, Graham. That's it.
I got you. It's coming. It's coming.
All right, no worries. Just trying to make sure everybody's knowing where we're at here.
I will say, just kind of looking at that list of teams under consideration, I think that's a pretty strong group for teams that aren't yet in that top 16. I think what we're seeing this year in general is just a much stronger group at the top of the field. And we have I know we talk about a weak bubble all the time, but it's really weak once you start to get about the 10 seed line or so. And I think a lot of that is because the teams in this range have been doing really well, as well as the teams that you might see in like a 7 or an 8 seed. Those are a little bit stronger resumes than a typical year.
Well, and too, to kind of pony on to what Graham said, when you have now one less conference and extra teams in 2 conferences, I think inherently you're going to see potentially some weaker, at least more losses on resumes and stuff, because teams are beating each other up, and so those teams that are 10th or 11th or 12th in those conference, their resume is just not going to look necessarily as pretty for that reason. So I would just say that this may be probably one reason we're getting that. And then we just have other teams that, it hasn't been a very strong year overall in like the A10 and some other, the other leagues. So that's where we're at. I know we're not there yet, but I think our easiest task tonight is probably going to be the one line.
Yeah, I think the twos are pretty cut and dry, too.
Maybe a debate on an order on a one spot, on 3 and 4, but I don't think we'll have a lot too much debate on what 4 teams are going to end up there.
Yeah, I agree with Kerry too. I don't even think the 2 line has a huge roster of debate. But yeah, once we get to the 3 and 4, I think I'm very curious to see how the conversation goes.
Well, by then I'll be on my 3rd or 4th Guinness. So
You won't care.
Yeah, you won't be holding anything back, Kerry.
fucking
One
Memphis,
Guinness per
9
line.
overall.
All right, I'm just adding them up here.
Hey, just anybody who's watching, we at least one of us is monitoring the chat on YouTube. You can throw questions at us. You can throw insults at us, whatever you want, just to kill some of this dead time that will be inevitable as we're figuring out who to vote for and all that. But we'll try and keep an eye on the chat and we'll toss it out to the group.
Yeah, I've got a question, Kerry.
Ooh, put it in the chat.
Oh, okay. I got to log in. I don't even know my YouTube.
Yeah,
I don't know
Rocco,
my
Rocco, there's
YouTube
a
password.
formal process here for questions.
What's up,
Yeah,
Rob?
I don't know. Yeah, I'm a gunslinger, I guess. My bad. Are you guys not neighbors anymore, you and Graham? Why is Graham not at Kerry's house? That's the biggest question of the night.
Yeah, I texted him right before this. I mean, neither of us has moved. We're about 10 minutes apart from each other, but I was like, I think I texted you like not even an hour ago. I was like, do you want to come over for this? Like, should we do this together? And you've got kids, I've got kids. I'm sure at some point during the main thing in a couple of weeks, we'll do at least one session together.
I'm sure Kerry's wife has something to say about it.
Okay, we have some winners here. Are you ready?
Ready.
Ready as I'll ever be.
We have Ole Miss. We have Marquette, St. John's, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Michigan State.
Interesting.
Who's not? Illinois, UCLA, and who's the other one?
Memphis.
Memphis got left out. Yeah.
Wow.
Well, they're not left out. They're still the 2 that don't get in here are going to go with those 5. We're going to rank those.
Okay.
And then a couple of those 3 of those will get into the top 20. So just because you're picked 20th, when we go the seeding process, heck, they could be a 3 seed for all we know,
Yeah.
Let's
All
go.
right. So let me pull those up and let's start discussing those. Anybody got any comments on those teams?
Well, I'll talk about Michigan, I guess. I know we haven't got our conference assignment, so I might as well steal some Midwest while I can. I don't think I'm going to get the Midwest later in the process. So, Michigan's a team after, it was only a 2-point win over Purdue. In fact, if that last shot goes in, they lose. But I thought between today and Monday, that one win did a lot for them in a variety of ways. Of course, got them another win over the field. It's not always you see a home win create that much of a jump, but a lot of their metrics and of course all their different records across the quadrants, etc., improved just that much more. Showed a little bit more evidence of where Michigan belongs. And so for me, they jumped from about somewhere around 18, 19, 20, maybe even 21 on Monday to the top 16. I won't say where yet, but they were in the top 16, and I was very surprised. That's why it's so fun to go through the process, because you don't know exactly where teams are, even if you think you know, like when games end, until you go through and dissect all the numbers and see how they compare against each other. So shout out to Michigan, Dusty May. And you know, the other thing I'll say, they're in first place in the Big Ten as well. So as we go through the exercise, right now they're representing as an 18-team mega conference coast-to-coast champion. That also adds some juice to their resume as you talk about the Wolverines right now.
The conference doesn't matter. Remember,
Conference championships do. So so they would be the representative AQ in this case. That's what I was saying.
I was thinking for a while that when Michigan State was still, 9-0 or whatever they were in the Big Ten, like, man, do we need to start talking about the Spartans for a 1 seed? Because if you're a 1-loss, 2-loss, God, when they were possibly an undefeated Big Ten champion, like, that's got to matter. I don't think we've ever had a fewer than 3-loss Big Ten champion that wasn't a 1 seed. So yeah, for Michigan to be there at 11-2 in league play, like, yeah, conference record doesn't matter, but it kind of does. I mean, if you're going to win the league, that's kind of a big deal.
Yeah,
And it's a strong Big Ten too. This is a good year for the Big Ten.
Yeah, they get 9 teams in, I'm sure. So, like, yeah, I agree with that, Kerry. I think what's going to happen organically, if they can get to the finish line with just one more loss or somehow sweep it, which is obviously unrealistic, those wins that you're talking about are going to come organically. They're going to have to beat good teams. I think there's another Illinois game. There's a bunch of good games in there. So it's kind of like the win against Purdue, what it did for them. It's a little bit unforeseen going in, and obviously Purdue was a top 6 or 7 team before that, and the Big Ten leader at the time. But that just made everything look a little bit prettier for Michigan across the board. And if they keep picking up those wins, it will only continue.
Popped up Michigan and Wisconsin side by side up there, because we're talking Big Ten.
It's only showing Wisconsin, and I'm not a share screen master by any means.
Really? It's interesting.
You made us have to scroll it up and down, Tim.
You might be able to share 2 at once. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I can do that.
Like, I think there's a way you can, like, share your actual whole screen as opposed to just sharing one particular segment of it. I'm not sure.
No, I did. That's what I'm doing, is sharing the whole screen. But what I'm saying is this is why we did this last night. It worked last night, so I don't know what the deal is. But at any
Well, I
rate,
mean,
we
while
can
we
do
have
this.
Wisconsin pulled up,
How's that?
I think,
Everybody see that?
Yeah, I see.
Yeah.
I mean, while we have Wisconsin pulled up, I think they've been the most interesting team to me all year from a bracketing perspective and a seed list perspective, because they really don't have a whole lot at the top of their resume, but they have been really, really clean when they're not facing the top of their resume. And I think you look at that Wisconsin-Michigan game in Madison, I think to Rocco's point, that was a big win for Michigan. Now it's a really big win for Michigan, because I think it starts to become a differentiator in my mind. But I look at Wisconsin, I think about those 41 free throw attempts that they made against Arizona. Arizona's a terrific win for Wisconsin, but that was at home, and it was with 41 free throw attempts. That was 41 made free throw attempts. That was a really interesting, dirty game. And I don't know if the committee is going to talk about that when they meet, but I just look at the top of Wisconsin's resume and think, very, very good basketball team, but probably not quite up at that elite level. And I kind of tend to think that's where the committee's going to see them.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Rocco.
Just a quick comment on that. I think it's a clear divide in their 8 road results in quad 1. The 4 road wins were against non-tournament teams. The 4 road losses were against tournament caliber. So I think they still, like in this top 4 seed, protected seed discussion, I think they still have something to prove away from home. Obviously a very good home team, obviously a very good team at just taking care of their business. So you love that about this team. But what it comes down to, Ohio State's a bubble team. We'll give them that credit for that. And Nebraska's in probably. Arizona's obviously great, but those are all home wins. So until they win against a tournament team away from home, that's where I was struggling, even putting them in as a top 3 seed, and then even struggling with a little bit of a 4 seed, because there's a lot of good contenders, as Graham mentioned. Like, those under consideration teams have some juice. Everything from about a 3 on to a 6 is pretty close right now.
It's also, I mean, to piggyback on what you guys said, they're 0-4 against their 4 toughest opponents on the road. And I do think at a certain point, you go back to what we were able to look past that a little bit, I think, earlier in the season, because that Pitt game kind of looked okay at that point. And we said, oh, you know what? They got that neutral court win at the Greenbrier. Pitt's dropped 35 spots in the net, I think, or 40 spots in the net over the past, 6 weeks. That kind of gave us an excuse to look past the Arizona win. But now you look at it and you say, well, yeah, they've beaten a lot of the middle of the pack. But when you get up to the 3 line, you get up to the 4 line, you get up to these protected seat areas, I use the analogy of playing golf, right? It's a lot easier to drop 10 strokes when you're shooting 100 and get to 90. But when you start getting into much more competitive territory and you're shooting 80 and you want to drop 10 strokes, it takes a lot more. You need to do a lot more to stand out at that point. And what they're competing against, teams ahead of them just have something away from home the committee's going to look at and say that gets them ahead. So I agree with Graham. Very, really fascinating resume case right now. Very clean, but just nothing that jumps out at you.
Oh, wow factor.
I mean, to jump in a little bit, kind of in the same vein, then, I think we have to throw St. John's into that same boat.
Until the UConn win, and then that changed a little bit.
I guess it depends on how you define a UConn win. I'm not 100% sold that that's.
Yeah.
I wouldn't call
I
a
got
net 31 an elite win. I mean, it's a big win on the road. I'm not taking anything away to go into Storrs, Connecticut and win. Any team would take that 7 days a week and twice on Sunday. So I'm not diminishing that. But, if you look, they're under 500 against quad 1. I don't know. That's my thing. I think St. John's is a really good team. Their resume is very clean, obviously. And their computer numbers are pretty solid across the board. But if we're going to say Wisconsin, if we're going to talk about them, they have a much, to me, beating Arizona like they did at home still is probably a better win than something that St. John's is going to present right now. And then again, you have to factor in how good do you think the Big East is? Because out of conference, St. John's best win is, New Mexico at home. So I think that's, for me anyway, that's been a real challenge for me with St. John's. I know Graham said Wisconsin. I've struggled with St. John's and probably had them a little lower than most, throughout the year. And that's one of the reasons why, is I just haven't seen their elite level wins compared to some other teams that we're talking about potentially being, in that top 16. I think they're really close. I could see it going either way, at the very bottom of that. But I think that's a consideration, much like Wisconsin potentially.
I'm not gonna talk luck because I'm just facilitating because I'm not voting. But there are a couple things I'm gonna jump in on. We got 2 right here. Number 1 is St. John's. They're 21-4, and I always value winning, right? I think sometimes we get lost in the numbers and we don't value winning. I truly do value winning. However, when you look at their resume, I mean, they have 3 wins in quad 1. I mean, some teams have 3 wins in the top of Q1A quad. I mean, look at Wisconsin, and Wisconsin doesn't, but in Q1 they do, right?
Before they faced Marquette in Connecticut, right? They had nothing. If they had lost both of those games, they're smack dab on the bubble right now.
Now, I think the game with Marquette was their best game. No, I mean, UConn. I'm just, after seeing them in person with McNeely last night, they are a totally different team with him. I mean, he's their team. So they played them without McNeely, so that's kind of a little bit of a asterisk. But we'll find out. The other thing too is they racked up a lot of wins playing the bottom part of the Big East, and that's how they got 21. And now they're getting into their stretch, right? They play Creighton Sunday. They have to play Marquette and UConn again. So when you're balancing out the Big East, I do want, since we're talking about the Big East, and we can come back to St. John's, but I'll pop up. I got to be honest. I was guilty of this too. They lost those 3 in a row, and I really soured on them. And I took a long, hard look starting yesterday at their resume, and I'm like, boy, you're a fool. Marquette, I don't see how they can't be in the top 16, frankly, with this resume. And here's one thing I went back on last year. If you remember, Wisconsin racked up a lot of wins early on. Then they lost 4 of 5 right before the reveal. Everybody was down on them. People didn't have them in. The committee didn't forget those November wins, and they put Wisconsin in. And I think we kind of have a similar situation here with Marquette. I mean, to do what they did, it beat Purdue, Maryland, Wisconsin, and Georgia. 2 of those away from home. That's pretty impressive. They also have win, obviously, against Creighton. They got Villanova. They got a road win at Xavier, which isn't an easy place to play. They've got 11 Q1 and 2s. Pretty clean resume. So, their metrics predictives are right in there. Obviously, their results are a little better. But I know St. John's beat them, but St. John's beat them on their home floor. But I'm not, I'd say Marquette's right there with them. If you're considering St. John's, you certainly got to consider Marquette. The floor is anyone else's.
Yeah. I would just say, first of all, in St. John's, I agree with everything that was said, including Tim, you, Dave, everybody else that talked about St. John's. It is what it is. But I think the fascinating thing about their 4 losses, and there's a reason why the final scores are on the team sheet, is they've lost by a combined 7 points in those 4 losses. They are 7 points away from being 25-0. And, don't bring this up to a St. John's fan if you, unless you want to get a cluttered inbox. But if you watch the end of that Baylor game, it was a very controversial loss. We'll just leave it at that. So there is the train of thought, which we have to do as, guys that follow the process to a T. And that's fair because that's what the committee is going to do. And it will be up to the Georgetown athletic director in that room to well represent his rival at St. John's for his league, because there is a strong case you can make for them. Like I said, that's the good side for them, is they're that close to being undefeated. And they have the road UConn win, which is a better road win than anything close to what Wisconsin has on the road. So, that's just one comparison. On Marquette, Tim, you made great points. I think it's a real struggle to round out that top 16. You could dive a hole starting, I think, at 13 and go all the way into 22, 23 teams to try to fill it. And I'll just say Marquette definitely deserves to be in that mention. From there, you're just really comparing and going with what you like. I think it'll be a close vote tonight.
I'll say this about St. John's. It's a trip to the dentist's office when you play them.
Oh, yeah. Well, they're scared to lose. They're scared to lose. Like, they do not want to be yelled at by Rick Pitino if they lose.
I think a great game if you love football would be St. John's and A&M. I've seen them both live, and it would be a football. Both those teams are football teams.
Throw Houston.
The difference, a little bit of a difference, I would say, St. John's is, and we saw it last night. I mean, there's ways you can defend. I mean, they're painful on the offensive end. They really are. But man, their defense is elite, and nobody plays that full court game like they do.
Right.
And when you got Rick Pitino
that's the
saying this
thing.
is a great defensive team, that's saying something, man.
That's the thing to what was mentioned before. What Rocco mentioned. I mean, that team is never going to be out of the game just because of how they play defense.
Until Sunday, they're going to get blown out.
Well, maybe Sunday is different. Too.
Yeah.
But they're not going to be out of many games at all because their defense is always going to keep them in there. It's going to just come down to can they make shots to win the game. But that's why they have those 4 losses by 7 or 8 points. So. Yeah. One thing I want to just quickly add on St. John's, I mentioned this the other day. It's pretty interesting. If you look at St. John's a couple weeks ago, even like 3 or 4 weeks ago, their non-conference strength of schedule was in the 240s. It has jumped up almost 100 spots in that time frame. It's now 151, which when you're in the 240s, I think the committee can look at that and say, that's easier to nitpick when you get down to it. But they have been helped immensely by New Mexico, Kansas State. Bryant
Yes.
has really done very, very well. Even Virginia's had a little bit of a push up. So all these teams have really changed
Xavier
the
too.
dynamic.
Xavier's gone up. Xavier's down in the 70s. They're now at 54.
Well, I'm just talking
Oh, I'm sorry.
non-conference.
You're talking non-conference.
Yeah,
Sorry.
just and I think Quinnipiac also has made a push up too. So they just have dramatically altered that piece. And I know the committee really likes to hyper focus on that was in certain cases. So that's something where I feel like almost with St. John's, when you can get to the end and be like, it's just something that was sticking out 4 weeks ago. Now it's kind of hard to really nitpick that because it's just not all that bad. It's not great, but it's not all that bad.
Down St. John's, if you give me just a second. I think if the committee valued the eye test more, they would be a top 4 seed, no doubt. But now it seems that only they look at numbers. And when you do that, they're just a little bit lower. They don't come across as good, but man, that's a team I don't want to play.
Yeah.
Well, they're really hard to ignore for me because they've won 70% of their quad 1-2 games, right? Like even if they only have 3 wins against the net top 50, 3 wins against quad 1, they still won 70% of those games against quads 1 and 2 completely clean outside of the top 2 quads. So I look at it just not from just being a tough stylistic matchup. I also think that win percentage against the top part of their schedule, even if it's been a weaker schedule for a power conference team, still very impressive.
Yeah.
There's
no losses outside of quad 1.
Conversely, I'll say they've only won 3 games against the top 50. And there's only one other team in the top 25 of the net who's done that. That's Gonzaga. So,
Well, I mean, the only other thing I would add, and again, this is where what's fun about this process is you really get down into the nitty gritty of this, right? So,
Yep.
if you're looking at like Wisconsin and St. John's like side by side, right? They're in some ways they're kind of similar type of profiles. If we're going to talk about St. John's not having any, all losses in quad 1. That's true. The only thing you could add if you want to be nitpicking is one of their losses would be to a non-tournament team, and that was at Villanova, where every team that Wisconsin has lost to would be actually everybody that Wisconsin has lost to are people that we're voting on and talking to tonight. Now I realize that several of those were road losses, and Rocco's exactly right. I mean, this is where they're not going to be in contention to be a 2 or a 3 seed because they haven't beaten those high-end teams away from home. But I think if you're looking at those little bitty comparisons, you could say, yeah, well, Wisconsin's worst loss is on the road by 2 points at UCLA by net. And UCLA is just coming off a 10-game winning streak to Illinois beat them the other night. So to go out to Poly and lose by 2 points, whereas losing at Villanova, again, I'm not saying losing at Villanova is not a bad loss, but it's not the same as losing it at UCLA or Marquette or Maryland.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Let's
okay, we have to move this. So anyone else we want to discuss here? I think we've got everybody except Ole Miss, but
I would say Michigan State too is kind of
okay.
I mean, just kind of curiosity out of them because, obviously the loss at home to Indiana the other night,
That killed them.
Probably is to me is a little bit like the St. John's at Villanova thing, although, one was road, one was home.
Yeah, it's a big difference.
And so that obviously is a bit different for sure. But I really like Michigan State's team, but it's the same thing. They have a 2-point win over Illinois at home, but the rest of their wins are Ohio State, North Carolina, and quad 1, Northwestern, and Rutgers are quad 1 wins. But nobody's going to look at those quad 1 and say, yeah, well, none of those teams outside of Ohio State are tournament teams. And then they have wins over Oregon and Nebraska at home. So again, really good team. And they're going to be right along that cut line. But I think if, when you start breaking things down, that's a potential talking point when we look at Michigan State. Now they're back into their schedules pretty strong coming home. So
Insane.
obviously
coming home.
that could change dramatically here. It's a
Yeah,
little
I
bit
mean-
like Illinois. We haven't talked about them, but they're in the middle of a 4-game. They get Michigan State at home, a rebound this weekend, and then they go to Wisconsin, and then they play Duke. So their seeding apparatus could change a lot here pretty soon.
That's the interesting thing about them. The Spartans losing at home to Indiana was that was supposed to be one of their easiest games left, and they lost it. So who knows where they're heading now? I mean, obviously they've outperformed a lot of expectations most of the year, but with that loss and where all their numbers sit right now, it's a little bit of a soggy sourdough sandwich, and they have to go eat a full hoagie the rest of the way.
I think finally we just got a couple minutes, then we're gonna have to vote here, but or rank these teams. But Ole Miss to me has always been like in the top 5 or 6 lines. It seemed to me to be the most overlooked team because the SEC is so powerful and everybody just overlooks them. But this resume is not bad. You know what I'm saying?
Well,
Really
the
good.
good news is-
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, Tim, Ole Miss was my Marquette today. The one that I just couldn't stop looking at. Obviously, that shiny road Alabama win, really hard to beat that. Even the difference between them being number 2 instead of number 3 on the board makes it even prettier. But in general, Ole Miss, it didn't look like a lot just winning at LSU, but it's just another road win, a high-end quad 2 road win. I love those road numbers. Obviously well above 500 in road neutral, 8-4. I mean, that's so much better than a lot of the teams we're talking about. Not only to mention they have, a top 50, top 25 type game almost every time they take the court. So naturally they're going to get the wins. I'm not as concerned there, but the fact that they've done a bunch on the road already is a really, really good sign. I think that's telling the committee to probably include them in this top 16.
Not to mention, I mean, they have one of the top. Sorry, Graham. I was just going to say they have one of the top, probably 3 wins in the country, winning at Alabama, and that is, a crown jewel of crown jewels, getting you, potentially in a little bump ahead of someone else.
We
Like you
refer to
said.
that. We refer to that as a piece of gold.
That's
Piece
a
of gold. There
sack
you
of
go.
gold.
Sack of gold. Yeah. Sorry, Graham. I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No,
Oh, you're
but
good.
I think with Ole Miss, that's a really, really strong resume. If you look at the
Yeah.
games they've played, I think just take the numbers out of it and look at it, really, really strong resume. Couple things do concern me a little bit with Ole Miss. 7 games against net 200 plus. So you think of an SEC team, think every game is difficult, but not every game has been difficult for Ole Miss to get up to that level. And then I also think one thing we do need to consider there, to Rocco's point about St. John's having those close losses, what if that Grambling game goes the other way in quad 4? Then what are we thinking about Ole Miss? So I think you look at their efficiency, and that's some of what's happened, is there have been times they snuck through on some games that maybe they could have lost. So really, really impressive resume. But I think that's what's holding them from having an elite resume, is some of these closer results.
Wasn't
Okay.
it Detroit? It was Detroit Mercy last year, wasn't it? When they were like 360th and they won by 1 point. Anyway, they didn't get in last year. Doesn't matter.
All right. All right, let's vote. Now, these we're going to rank. So when you text them to me, you have to put them in order. These 6 teams they have on the board right now, those are the numbers that correspond to that team. So make it easy for everyone.
And we're just voting for the top. We're ranking them all in order, right?
Ranking them all in order. Correct, sir. All 6.
While we're doing this, I'll try and multitask and hit on some of the questions in the chat. We had one that Shelby answered in the chat. Graham, not you, Graham, other Graham, Dinus. Wondering how you guys have changed your bracket building process with mega conferences and everyone only seeing each other once in conference play. Are you bracketing more rematches in the round of 32 and Sweet 16 than normal? I think certainly with the SEC, don't have much of a choice, but if any of you guys want to weigh in on that one.
Absolutely.
Well, exactly,
makes
Terry,
it
to your
easy.
point. I mean, to your point, if in fact the SEC gets 12 teams in, or something like that when all's said and done, there's going to have to be some of it because there's simply no way to avoid it. And I don't know how many times I've gone back and looked and say, okay, I can put this team one of two places that they're going to have to play somebody in the second round. Who did they only play once? That's a twice a week proposition right now. So it could affect the team where they go into what region, simply because if let's say that one of them's a 7 or a 10 and they're playing against a 2 in that same pod potentially in the second round.
Yep.
And you're going to say, okay, well, which 2 seed did they only play once? And then that's the one they're going to have to go to.
Right. Makes it easier in some cases if there's 2 choices and you won't
Had a
only
lot-
playing one of them once.
I think it's almost inevitable that we're going to have either on the 1, 8, and 9 lines or on the 2, 7, and 10 lines, there are going to be 5 SEC teams in one of those groupings. It's going to be impossible to avoid a second round matchup. It's going to come down to who they haven't played multiple times. Another question in the chat. Somebody was asking about Xavier. I don't think they know this is a top 16 or even an NCAA tournament at all conversation. What are the 2 or 3?
They got that new tournament in Vegas for Big East and Big Ten members. Xavier's going to be invited.
What are the 2 or 3 Big 12 teams that need a strong finish to make the dance? Definitely more of a bubble conversation than top 16. But I mean, like a week ago, I had BYU, Arizona State, and UCF were my first 3 teams out. I think they've all dropped off, and now Cincinnati and Kansas State are charging. Like, you've got that whole quintet of Big 12 teams who I don't think any of them are in right now, but they're all close.
Yeah, also, I mean, I think it's worth throwing in West Virginia too. I know they're in a really good spot based on the wins that they have, but just the volume of losses is really adding up, and it's going to make an interesting case for them. They still have a pretty brutal schedule coming in. They have to go at Baylor, they go to Lubbock, they go to BYU. I'm a little worried about the Mountaineers, although they do have a significant amount of leeway based on what they did in Atlantis and otherwise winning at Kansas too.
I'm not so sure that Baylor is 100% safe.
No,
Baylor too. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think for those teams that are still fighting from the outside, trying to work their way in, maybe minus BYU, they're really close at this point. But like the Kansas State, Cincinnati's of the world, UCF, Arizona State, all in that mix now. I mean, they just have different types of diseases, need different types of doctors to get healed. Kansas State's been fascinating, but they still have so much work to do. And at any point when they lose again, it's just going to add to the pile of a huge set of problems that they're still trying to fix. And then for Cincinnati, there's just not enough. There's really just nothing there still. They're just hold and serve against some of these mushy Big 12 teams. But until they're going to probably have to knock off 1 or 2 of those big time teams that we're talking about tonight.
Like they go to Ames and Houston, right? Coming up.
That would do
soon.
it. That would do it.
Yeah.
They're going to need 1 or 2 of those, I think, to make themselves interesting again. Because right now their profile is just very, very bland, no flavor.
When we were talking about Baylor, I looked up their schedule. They got I think this next Saturday and Monday are big because they get West Virginia and Arizona at home. But Baylor's only 2 and 7 on the road.
Yeah.
This year, so they haven't been a very good road team. And then after they get this weekend 2 at home, the 3 of their last 5 are on the road. And those are games you probably don't want to be losing if you're going to Colorado, you're going to Cincinnati, and you're going to TCU. So on the surface, that looks like a favorable schedule for Baylor, but they haven't done well on the road. So if they like a split this weekend, they beat West Virginia, lose to Arizona, and then they drop a couple of those road games, it could still get a little bit interesting for Baylor.
Yeah.
In theory, they're set up to close strong because the schedule's favorable down the stretch. I mean, they close at Houston, so we say, okay, you're not going to win that one probably, but
it's all upside if they do somehow.
Yeah, well, then that changes a lot of things.
Exactly. Yeah, it's an all upside game.
I mean, right now, I think Baylor's they're not teetering right on the bubble up on the bubble yet, but they're getting close enough for me that they're not very far off from being in that last 4 buys category. And you'd rather stay out of that if you could.
Right.
I want to talk because they'll be in this next go round, and that'll go pretty quick. UCLA.
I think UCLA had a really great chance to be in here had they won this game this week, but they lost, and I think that's probably the nail in the top 16 at this point, but still time to get back up there.
Yeah, by way of the net, they have a couple great neutral court wins just due to the fact that Gonzaga's net is still really strong, and obviously Arizona's way up there in the 10-11 range, but and they have 4 wins technically in Quad 1A, which certainly stands out. It's certainly more than teams like Michigan, Marquette, Ole Miss, Illinois, Memphis, Mississippi State, etc. But I think as you go through their records, taking on 6 losses is a lot. They're average in Quad 1, 6 out of 12. Obviously, a crazy experience this first year in the Big Ten for those of us from the West. Making 4 trips east is something that really nobody else they're being compared to is having to do, but it is what it is. You can only take the results for what they are. And I think with that being said, they're average on the road, 5-5 road neutral, 3-3 in the top 2 quad road games. So again, if they had something that popped in those areas like Ole Miss does, for example, I think they'd be really interesting, but I think it's pretty easy to dismiss them with everything else being average.
Do you remember in Dumb and Dumber when Harry and Lloyd are sitting on the hotel bed and like wiping their eyes and their noses with $100 bills? That's how I feel when Mick Cronin pitches a fit about having to fly east for any games. Like, it is what it is, man. You got your money.
And it's UCLA's fault. Like
Right.
we could have maybe saved the league if they didn't leave. So
Yeah.
that was the great irony.
How about Illinois?
I think Illinois has a better
Uh-huh.
argument than people probably think. If you
I
just
agree.
look at the resume metrics,
Totally
it looks
agree.
like a slam dunk shouldn't be top 16. But when you look into it, it's a pretty good.
No.
profile.
Performance metrics, not resume metrics. Their resume metrics are awful.
Oh no, that's what I'm saying. If you look at the
Okay,
resume
yeah.
metrics, you would think for sure they shouldn't be top 16. Like,
Oh,
not
gotcha.
even close.
Sorry. Yeah,
But
yeah.
once you actually look at the games that they've played, you start to think there's something there. Like,
Yeah.
I think Illinois is a solid 5 seed for me. I don't think they're quite top 16 team, but I do think even some bracketologists are sleeping a little bit on Illinois' profile.
Well, and Tim and I were texting about this. We were chatting the other day. Historically, because the question comes up, well, but this is a case with a lot of teams. But what do you do? How much does the committee factor in that 2 of those losses were when Yakachonis was out with his wrist injury and didn't play?
Yeah, especially
And
the
the
bad
Michigan
the
State
bad
game,
loss.
And the Michigan State game, maybe their most important player, Ivisic, already had mono, but they didn't know it. He played in that game or tried to, wasn't very effective, had strep throat already, missed the next 2 games, and a couple of those losses. So again, the committee never ever assumes that a team wins a game because a player was or wasn't there. So they don't get credit for a win. But I think for me, they've been one of those teams all year where their 2 levels of metrics don't really mesh. You've got, the predictives are saying they're really good because when they're really good and they beat teams by 25, 30 points. But they've also lost some games that, injury or not, give you a little pause, and that's where their resume metrics come down. So it's a little bit for me right now of let's see what this team looks like when they get whole, but I'm not sure they're quite at that level to be a top 4 seed heading into this weekend when you factor in all of it. That's kind of where I fall on them. I think they're a good team, but probably just outside that window right now.
I agree with that too. And somebody mentioned it before with their schedule coming up. If gun to my head, yet say, hey, this is the team you expect that won't be in, that will be in come Selection Sunday, I would probably say Illinois, just because of the opportunity they have. And to your point too, when they are fully healthy, they have looked like a really, really good team. They got Michigan State at Wisconsin, then Duke, obviously on the neutral court. Still have to go to Michigan and get Purdue at home. So there's a huge opportunity for them. But I do think they're just outside now, but I would not be shocked to see them as a 3 or 4 seed come Selection Sunday.
Okay, so we got, as you can see on the board, everybody went in except Ole Miss and Michigan State. So they're added to these 5. We've gone almost an hour and we haven't got to seating yet, so we're gonna pick it up here a little bit. I just want to mention one thing about Memphis. I've loved their resume all year long. I love the fact that they went out and played people. But it's kind of why I put that note in the email. There ain't no way they are putting a team with a 45 net in their top 16. I'm sorry. They're just not going to. Case closed.
I think it
Still
would
put
be
Memphis
different
at the
if
top
they,
of my ballot here.
I mean, to me, I think Memphis's big problem with that isn't necessarily the net by itself. It's the fact that they have 2 bad losses to go with it. If they didn't have the 2 bad losses to go with it and just barely pulled those games out, I think it might be a different story.
Yeah, the committee's just not going to do it. I mean, historically, I think the highest is 35 that they put in the top 16 reveal.
And the
I
other
mean, we
thing
saw
is,
the same thing with Wisconsin and Providence, though, back in 2022, right? There's going to be a team that breaks the mold, and they both broke the mold in the same year.
Yeah, but I'm just talking about the reveal. They were only like 22 and 29 or something
Yeah,
like that.
I think Providence was 31, but yeah.
Yeah. We're not talking 45. That's what I'm saying. I'm just saying it's way out, and it's the conference they play in, right? All right, let's rank these 5.
Oh, the ones you got the little square box around there?
Illinois, Memphis, Michigan State, Ole Miss, UCLA.
Does everybody have the numbers, or you guys need them?
I know UCLA is 21.
got them handy, baby. So these are in order, right, Tim?
Yes. I'm sorry. Yeah, we're gonna rank them. Yeah, put them in order. Thank you.
No problem.
Another question from the chat. Keep those coming for when we have any dead time. Literally ask us anything. It doesn't have to be about bracketology. But with conference realignment, how close are we to the committee abandoning bracketing principles and going to a true seed list? Back to the old S curve. I have no clue if we're anywhere close to that. I doubt it. I think we're closer to expanding the field to 96 teams than any sort of bracketing principles changes there.
I mean, the reason this whole thing went away from the S curve is because that's what the universities wanted. The universities said, we want to be closer to home. If that means that maybe we don't get quite as balanced of a bracket, doesn't matter. We want shorter trips for our family. We want shorter trips for our fans, and especially our players to not travel so long. So this wasn't even like an NCAA thing. This was a universities wanted it. So this is why it's going to continue this way.
I just wish the small schools got to play close to home, right? Like I've had Northern Colorado at like a 14 seed, and Denver is constantly showing up as a 3 seed, but they're never going to put Northern Colorado against, a Houston when Northern Colorado would have the geographic advantage there.
Got to send them to Seattle, Kerry.
I know.
Send them up to the Pac Northwest.
Yeah, we get that question. I always remind people, though, that's only for the first round.
Right, yeah.
Because there's been plenty of examples where a 6 has had a home court advantage against a 3, or a 7 versus a 10, a 7 versus a 2 or something else, because the committee doesn't.
Yep.
But whether they should or they shouldn't, they don't project who's going to win. So at the first round, yes. But after that, we saw Wisconsin was a 6 in Milwaukee against Pitt.
Auburn was an 8 in Birmingham a couple years ago, right? Or a 9 in Birmingham against
there was a hot minute like a month ago where I had North
I have-
Carolina going to Raleigh as an 8 seed to face whether it was Tennessee or Florida or whatever. It's
Well,
just
I have Louisville right now as an 8 seed in Lexington.
Lexington.
So do
Yes.
I.
So
I think another sneaky one there
that
would be UConn as a 6 in Providence would be very interesting if they can
Well,
get to that line.
But could
That's
you
possible.
imagine Louisville in Lexington playing either Auburn or Alabama in the second round if they won? That would be
well, I have Louisville Gonzaga in the first round, which would be juicy enough, and then they get Alabama if they win that.
yeah. That's where
Actually had
we must have had the same bracket the other day,
We probably did. We have to check.
or at
that.
least pretty close.
Yeah.
I keep ending up with Louisville against West Virginia in the first round. Just a national coach of the year showdown between Pat Kelsey and Darian DeVries.
I actually had a Louisville fan contact me about having Louisville as the 8 seed in Lexington. He says, we shouldn't be allowed to play there, should we?
I feel like they're stealing.
But hey, there have been several times. I was there one time in Lexington when Xavier was there as an 8 or a 9 seed.
Well, that's even better because at least
I mean, it's about the same. It's about the same distance.
It's better because if Louisville goes, then all the Kentucky fans will root against them. But if Xavier goes, they probably get everybody rooting for him.
Well, that was kind of like, when was it? What year was it that South Carolina's Final Four run? I forget off the top of my
They
head.
played in Greenville.
Yeah.
They played in Greenville, and
Because the
Carolina.
bathroom law.
Yeah.
Well, Carolina and Duke were both there, and you had all the Carolina fans in the stands going up against. Everybody was rooting against Duke, pretty much.
Remember
the whole
when
stadium.
I was at the games in Lexington one time when Duke was there. I think that was back when Trajan Langdon and that group was there as a 1 seed. And of course, everybody who just got tickets that went there that didn't have anybody else. Duke and Lexington, just those two things don't mesh very well. That was and that was not that far after the Christian Laettner game either. So in terms of years,
Yeah, Duke would probably rather go to Seattle than that.
Duke wanted to
All
go
right.
to Chicago in Coach K's last year, but they weren't the overall 1 seed, so they didn't get to choose.
Yeah, I had them in San Francisco instead, and that worked out okay for them.
Alrighty, we added Illinois, Michigan State, and Ole Miss. So we've got 20 teams. So what we want to do now is pick 8. Let me lower this down a little bit. You guys can still see this, correct?
Yep.
Alrighty.
Tim, you
So we can
successfully
see all the
swayed
teams
the
in that
vote
list.
against Memphis.
There we go. Alabama, Arizona, Auburn, Duke, Florida, Houston, Illinois, Iowa State, Kansas, Kentucky, Marquette, Michigan, Michigan State, Ole Miss, Purdue, St. John's, Tennessee, A&M, Tech, and Wisconsin. So we need to pick 8, not in any order, just 8 teams out of that group.
We're picking the top 8.
Best
Just
8.
pick 8 teams out of this group that you think are the best.
Pick your current 1s and 2 seeds.
Or if you got persuaded somehow, I don't know.
We had another question in the chat. When you're putting teams 17 through 68 in the field, are you putting them by closest first weekend or second weekend sites? First weekend, although frankly, it's mostly just where you're even legally allowed to put them this year. I don't know if anybody wanted to weigh in on that. Type my numbers.
Yeah, so
Okay.
basically when you start with your top 4 overall, or I guess your top 16 overall seeds, which would be your top 4 lines, you're going to want to put them in the closest available regional. But the problem with the regional is you have to balance the bracket with not just ensuring that the regions are numerically balanced, but also that you're not having teams from the same conference play each other sooner than they're allowed to play each other. Basically, what you want to do is take the top 4 teams from each conference and put them in different brackets as long as they're all top 4 seeds. Technically, this year, you don't have to do that if some of those teams are in like the 3 and 4 seed lines. The only cannot break rule this year is that they have to be in top 2 seeds for those top 4 teams from a conference, and you cannot break that one. But it could be relaxed if you needed to break it for teams that are on the 3 or 4 seed lines. But bottom line, generally for teams in the top 4 seed lines, we want to put them to the closest regional if possible. And then for teams that are seeded from 5 to 16, we want to put them in the closest sub-regional. And then if the sub-regionals are equal and they can be in that spot, then we would put them in the closest regional after that.
All the new top of the bracket, we just call that the SEC effect rule.
Yeah.
They're
Could
just
be
they're just
relaxed.
preemptive. They're just preemptively saying we realize there's a high likelihood that our previous rule of no more than 4 teams from the same conference, they all have to be in separate regions unless you have 5 in the top 16. They're realizing there's probably going to be the high potential for more than 5, so they're basically relaxing the rule so that they don't have to explain why they had to break it later.
I am sensing a theme.
Yeah, because typically, in years past, you would have to all go by. The other thing I don't think they would do is, so let's say that we have 5 SEC teams or 4 SEC teams in the top 5. That 5th one is probably going to obviously get paired against whichever top line team is not SEC. If that's the way it breaks, they would go there by default as the first next team. Now you could have another SEC team at 6, and then you would have to, but they wouldn't be against the overall number 1. I wouldn't think they wouldn't do that.
Yeah, I've had the same thoughts. We're basically
let's just say Auburn's number 1 overall, and let's say, Tennessee and Texas A&M are both 2 seeds. Well, if Tennessee's like number 5, they're going to go opposite the one team that's, if that ends up being Duke, they would go with Duke, and then the next one would not go to Auburn. It would go to one of the other 2. They're not going to take the number 1 overall seed and put another SEC team as a 2 there. I wouldn't think.
Great.
Yeah, I think at this point it's really just what SEC team is going to be put together with Duke, because it seems inevitable that's going to happen.
Didn't they announced some sort of change where we're basically headed, at least right now, that there are going to be 4 SEC teams in the top 5, and Texas A&M is very likely going to be 6 or 7, somewhere in that range. If it ends up being the 4th 1 seed, let's say it's Duke, theoretically, if they were number 4 overall and they go to the West, would the committee still send Tennessee as the top number 2 seed to the West, and then
No.
let Texas
They said
A&M go wherever
they
they
said
want?
they're not gonna deviate from that.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it could be Texas A&M that ends up facing Duke in the West in that scenario.
Correct. All right.
Right.
Much as last year when they had a unanimous vote on something, we had a unanimous vote on these 8. So,
yeah.
All right.
Dave said it before, and Graham said it. Not too much discussion on the 1-2, probably.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit of order on the 2 line, but and maybe
Well,
order
right now we're just gonna rank when we get done here. We're just gonna rank these 8. So, I mean, I hate to speak for everybody, but we don't have to talk about Auburn. They're so far out in front of everybody, it's not even funny. Alabama, Duke are right in there.
Florida disagrees with you, Tim. They didn't think Auburn was very good.
What's that?
I said Florida disagrees with you because they didn't think Auburn was very good when they went to the jungle.
Well, that's your boy over there in Florida, Rocco. So I expect that from you.
I'm down here this week, so I have to talk a little trash.
Oh boy. Well,
I'm just kidding.
it's a really funny joke, but it's inappropriate. I will let it go. All right.
I have a feeling I know what it might be related to.
All right. So correct me if I'm wrong, but probably some discussion between Florida and Tennessee here, or yes, no.
It's fairly close, I think, but it's
I think it's fairly close.
I think
Can I make a bold prediction before we move on? Even though we were unanimous in these 8, I bet when it comes time to add Kentucky to the mix, they might crack in at number 8. Just throwing that out there.
I see exactly where you're coming from. I don't know. By hesitant, nobody has more high end wins in Kentucky. Just on that volume of it. I'm just not sure that with 7 losses already, that they're going to be a 7-loss team on the 2 line at this point. But
Yeah,
I mean it's their high is as good as you're going to get.
Yeah.
They just have a few little head scratchers in there that make you go. Now, see, they're a team too, though. Butler didn't play for a few games, and he's still injured now. But they won this past week, and they beat Tennessee again, and they didn't have him. I mean, they had him for part of the game, and then he left again. So,
right.
We might not end up with Kentucky on the 2 line. I would not be shocked at all if Kentucky is up there and Houston is not.
So kind of looking at Florida and Tennessee here, I do think Florida has the edge. They have a better metric in every team sheet metric except for BPI. BPI is the only one that prefers Tennessee at this point. Florida is also 12-3 against quads 1 and 2. Tennessee is 10-5. I will say Tennessee still makes a pretty compelling argument. Those wins at Illinois, at Louisville, out of conference really do a lot for their resume. In Florida, it's not that deep if you really look at it. Arkansas is their 4th best win on the season. But when I look at Florida and I have those questions, they all seem to go away when you talk about terrific efficiency, terrific resume metrics, a 3-loss team out of the SEC, and they won at Auburn. You put it all together, I think it's got to be Florida for me.
Yep. No argument here.
None here.
Yeah, I mean, other than just getting blown out by Tennessee and then they, flip the script, you kind of call it, even Steven. Yeah, I mean, Florida's other 2 losses are, by 6 points at Kentucky when they scored 100, and then a 1-pointer, maybe a little bit of a shocker against Missouri. But, and I'll be honest with you.
Appreciate that.
I get it because of their non-conference schedule, but I'm a little surprised that Missouri didn't come up in any conversation here that would at least be considered for the bottom, not the 4, but that would have come up to be in the top 20.
Right. I agree with
Top
that.
21.
They were next with UCLA for me. In fact, I haven't even made a decision yet for my post tomorrow between those 2. So that's a good call out. Plus they won at Florida and Mississippi State. So 2 incredible road wins for the Tigers. They're just 4-6 in quad 1, and they're really not great yet outside of Columbia. Those 2 wins I referenced are their only 2 against anybody away from home. So they're 2-5 road neutral. That's what you get for playing a home MTE against garbage SWAC teams.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I said. That's where Missouri gets, their ding, as they just, that's the kind of thing where it comes back to haunt you if you want to get up to the very top.
Rocco, you said this earlier that you love this process because you like looking at teams that are way off. I just wrote down Missouri because I'm way out of the league, and I would not have them even close. So,
well, I'm here. I'm going to be covering Missouri Saturday here at Georgia. I got to see all these bubble teams live. So,
that's a big game for Georgia.
Big game for Georgia, has to win it. Missouri is actually pretty awesome to watch just from a basketball standpoint.
Yeah, they are.
And Greg Burns representing the SEC in the committee. I know he knows his stuff. So they'll be well represented in the room. I just don't think they're close enough to be strongly considered for this weekend.
No,
Rocco, that's a great point. Before we go any further, that's a great point because I think that's an overlooked factor when we're trying to whittle it down and we get down to the 4s, try to figure out. So who do you think has the strongest personality in that room?
These Power 5 guys for the most part. I tell you what, I reached out to Irma Garcia from Manhattan. She's brand new. I don't know if she knows. She's probably going to be learning everything for the first time this week.
Right.
That's not good. The Abilene Christian guy seems very, very raw. I've reached out to him. I know Stu Jackson knows his basketball from the WCC. Got some faith in him, and you know me, I'm over here pulling for the UC San Diego's, the San Francisco's, the Drakes, etc., to try to, get well represented at least. I'm not even saying they have to get in. I just want them to have a strong voice. But, you know, Bubba's the chairman. I think the really interesting thing is with the Pac-12 folding, instead of it being 6 power conference people and 6 non-power, it's actually 5 and 7. And I think, you know, if the non-power representatives organize together to stand up for a few of these teams, at least on the bubble, it might make a difference.
Yeah, I think the other X factor for me is Lee Reed at Georgetown, because he came from Cleveland State, Eastern Michigan, New Mexico. He has a history of understanding just how important this tournament is at a mid-major university. So that could be a vote that could swing as well.
Yeah, Stu, Big East guy. So let's put St. John's and Marquette in. There we go.
Well, Stu's in fight or flight mode too, because he knows St. Mary's is trying to get into the Pac-12. He knows that Gonzaga's already gone. The WCC is in trouble long term, so he's in. Yeah, he really wants to get a third team in this year for sure.
Right. All right. Let's go ahead and vote here.
Hey.
Rank these.
Hey, Tim, can I just throw out one quick thing that we haven't
Sure.
talked about? You know, because we're looking at the top, you know, we're going to be voting here. And to me, the more interesting potentially debate is the order of 3 and 4.
Mhm.
And, you know, you could make a case, as everybody well documented here, that just based on overall accomplishment, that you could say Florida, you know, would be let's just say Florida ends up in that top line. But, you know, then you just start comparing, okay, well, how do you compare them against Duke?
Yeah, Dave, good point, because we are going to put these are the way they will be seated. So, I mean, we can do a final scrub, but yeah.
Historically, I can only offer that, because I've mentioned this a year or two ago when we were doing this. I've just been doing this too long. If it comes down to it, you know, Duke's more likely to end up in the East than they are the West.
Mhm.
Well, we have San Francisco as a host again for regional, so I don't know if they want to send Duke there again. They just went there the first time. This is only the second time hosting in the Chase Center.
And I'm not saying there's anything wrong. I'm just saying, you know,
It's just how it shakes out,
right?
Yeah. Well,
Dave, I'm going to defer to
North
you.
Carolina out here last year too.
Dave's been nails on that Duke call. Remember a couple of years ago, Dave goes, "They're gonna put Duke as a 1," and he was right.
Yeah.
When in
doubt, yeah.
Get those votes in. It'll be quick.
When in doubt, go with the blue blood. That's the motto
Yep.
here. Moral of the story. Like, I got screwed out of the Michigan State. I had them out last year. I still believe to this day they belonged out, even though they won their first round game and made me look bad. I just feel like if they weren't Michigan State, they wouldn't have got in. But lesson learned.
Are we ranking all 8 teams?
All 8.
Okay.
1 through 8.
One
Well,
part of the
when I-
vote that I think could be kind of interesting is Texas A&M versus Purdue. I think Texas A&M has the edge, but you could still make the argument for Purdue. They have 14 wins against quads 1 and 2. They're 4th in KPI, 7th in Torvik. So it's a really impressive resume for Purdue. I think there's an argument they could be a little bit higher, but I do wonder if on Selection Sunday in particular, if Texas A&M and Purdue are right there next to each other, that win in Indianapolis holds a lot of weight for Texas A&M.
Yes, sir.
I think if they're right next to each other on Selection Sunday, the fact that A&M will presumably be 5th in the SEC and Purdue will presumably be the Big Ten champion might outweigh that neutral result. But going back to Duke, Florida, I thought when I put my bracket together for Tuesday morning, I was really close to having 4 SEC teams on the top line. Like, I thought Florida was very close to Duke then. And then Florida added a road win over Mississippi State while all Duke did was beat the shit out of a terrible Cal team. Florida might be ahead now. And now that it's not a 1 seed versus 2 seed conversation, I think the committee might be more willing to actually do it because it doesn't look like a penalty to Duke if they keep them behind Florida.
True. Tim, we're just sending you the top 8 in order, correct?
Yeah, we got it. It's unanimous. So
I will say for Duke, I think it could really come in handy that they went to Arizona in a true road game out of conference. They played Kentucky and Kansas on neutral courts. Duke clearly showed an intent to schedule out of conference, and I think that could be important versus Florida if it comes down to that.
I was going to mention that too with Florida and Tennessee. Florida's non-conference strength of schedule obviously is Tennessee's isn't great, but Florida's is pretty bad for the top of the bracket. And we know what happened with Iowa State, even though Iowa State's was sub 300, so they had a little ways to go last year. The one thing that I feel like the committee did a little bit more last year than I think recent years was really almost overemphasize the non-conference for certain teams. And the one thing that gives me a little bit of pause with Florida and Tennessee is Florida just not having any results really to speak of against any tournament teams in the non-conference. And the committee seemed in certain spots last year to really put focus on that. And Tennessee's best results are probably out of conference. I mean, they have the Florida win at home, but that Illinois game out of conference, Baylor to a certain degree, and then at Louisville. I don't think Tennessee should be ahead of Florida at this point, but that is one thing that gives me a little bit of pause about sliding the Gators ahead.
One thing on that non-conference, I think there's a difference between having a bad rank and not even trying.
Sure.
And I think Florida at least tried, right? Florida didn't know the ACC was going to be god awful. Like they played at Florida State. Obviously, they play that game, I think, every year, but played home against Virginia,
UVA.
which until mid-October looked like a good game.
Well, that's
the game against North Carolina in Charlotte was supposed to be a good game. They played Wake Forest. Like those all should have been at least solid quad 2 games. Even the Arizona State game that they played, I mean, that should have been a reasonably solid game. I don't know. I always look at intent more so than the actual
No,
number.
I think that's a good point.
Okay, somebody asked early on, what is holding cross country? That is their terminology when we're putting these 4 teams that didn't make that into the field over here, or into the seating over here. And now we're going to do a list of 8. Just make a list of 8. The 4 most, the top 4 teams will get with these 4 teams, and then we'll discuss, and then we'll rank those.
Tim, do you want to share? I think you're still on the Florida team page there.
Sorry, man.
No, it's good. All good.
I wish you could just jump back and forth.
At some point, somebody's got to ask why you have Kazakhstan pages open.
New weightlifting program for Mr. Kruger.
What's that?
Tim,
It's a
do
new
we have our
new
top
weightlifting
4
program.
teams?
There we go.
On Florida's schedule, I would just say also the Virginia game was due to ESPN. That's their assignment for ACC, SEC Challenge. Florida has no say in that.
Yep.
And then also, I can tell you on the ESPN event where they played Wake Forest first, that was done intentionally. They did not want to play Minnesota or Wichita in the first game where they could control that. And so they actually were correct in doing that as well.
Okay, so just to clarify, we're doing a list on teams in the field, your top 8. There they are right there. Wisconsin's at the bottom, Arizona's at the top. You're just doing a list of 8. The 4 with the most votes.
Not in order, correct, Tim? Just
No order. Just
shout 'em
list
out.
them. The
Okay.
4 teams with the highest vote total are going to be added. This is typically where we come up with a tie, but we'll see.
Yep.
So we're voting on the next 8, right?
Yep, 8 from teams in the field. Arizona through Wisconsin. Pick 8.
Hey, Tim, I see Purdue's in there, but is Purdue supposed to be in there in the teams in the field part?
Good call. There you go. Perfect. Thank you, Graham.
Do we want to talk about any of these? I mean, we haven't really touched on Arizona, Texas Tech
I
yet.
say
they
just
were already in.
I mean, we're still going to talk about them in the next process.
Okay. And we do have dead air to kill here. If anybody wants to talk on Arizona.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to, while we're getting the votes, sure, absolutely.
I mean, at least for me, Texas Tech has been a struggle. If they had lost that game against Arizona State last night, I don't know if they make the cut for top 16, just between their, harkening back to the Florida discussion. Like, Texas Tech didn't even try. They played one game against Texas A&M. I think that was on a neutral court. They lost it, and that was it. The rest of their schedule was a joke. I mean, both of these teams, Arizona and Texas Tech. I mean, Graham, we talked about it before. Like, one of our first pods that we did a do you think it's more likely that Arizona and Texas Tech get in, or that BYU and UCF get in? And at the time, we both said BYU and UCF, because Texas Tech and Arizona were garbage heading into like New Year's Eve. Like, they were not tournament worthy teams. And now here we are, probably going to have them as 3 seeds in a few minutes.
Yeah, I think for Texas Tech, I have a lot of pause, not just due to the non-conference strength of schedule, but also the fact that they lost to UCF at home and St. Joe's on a neutral court. So there are a couple blemishes to add to the non-conference strength of schedule. That said, it's not just a win at Houston. It's not just elite efficiency metrics. It's dominant performances in Big 12 road play in comparison to other teams in the Big 12. And that's what I think is really kind of gives Texas Tech a good combo, is what they've done. Let's take a look at it. They've won at BYU, at Cincinnati, at Kansas State, at Utah, and then they add at Houston as the cream of the crop there. So when you really
just told me 4 teams that aren't in the field, though, Graham.
I think BYU's in the field. I'll throw that one out there. But I also think Cincinnati and Kansas State are worthy of consideration at this point, and I think especially Kansas State. So I just think it's difficult to do that, right? Like, there's a difference between winning 1 or 2 road games against teams that are borderline top 75 like that. It's another thing to string them together. And I think the Red Raiders have done that and added that at Houston win. If it wasn't for winning at Houston, I would feel much more uncomfortable about Texas Tech, but I think they belong somewhere in the top 16 when you add it all together.
I was cynically kind of hoping Arizona State would win just to see if the committee wrapped up their work early this week.
Would have been a good indicator.
We'll find out with St. John's, though.
It happened like last year, the year before. It was pretty obvious they
don't play till
got it
Saturday.
all done by Tuesday or Wednesday.
I think it was last
Sunday.
year. It was like almost Monday or Tuesday.
Yeah, because there was some big game Thursday night or whatever, and they got asked about it, and
they're like, it didn't matter. Yeah, we were done.
No, last year was the San Diego State at New Mexico game on Friday, and San Diego State ended up making the cut. And we were like, well, you did count this game? Like, what the hell?
Yeah, there was a lot
They
of
said they have contingencies, but I don't know.
Well, there was one year where I want to say it was Michigan State and Purdue played on Friday night, and it was clear they didn't care who won that game because they basically ignored the Michigan State victory.
I mean, everybody's flown home by then, and they're not. Do you think Irma Garcia from Manhattan is getting on a call Friday? No, Irma's hitting the town.
I think it was pretty clear last year from the way that Mr. Warlock was yelling at some of us on Twitter that they were going to make it a point to include the Thursday and Friday games, because we had been saying that the games don't matter after even Wednesday. I think they went overboard to make sure that they counted that game against New Mexico.
I am absolutely convinced UCLA would be in had they won both of their road games this week.
Yeah.
Well, I think what they did is they reached out to each league this year and said no big games Thursday or Friday, because really almost none of these teams are playing these 2 nights.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just Memphis tonight and
UCLA tomorrow.
Yep.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, there's no SEC games, obviously.
In typical Memphis fashion, it's a 4-point game.
Oh boy.
Yeah, it's tough.
I was actually just pulling that up.
I'm watching
it. Midway through the first half. South Florida is also like 190.
It's the only game on TV at the hotel, so I'll take it. We'll take the one.
They're not giving you BTN down there in Atlanta, Rocco?
They need to be.
Maryland's winning.
Yeah.
On the
road.
Well, Big Ten Network. I thought you meant BTN like the BET.
Oh. Well, that's always fun too. But I was going for Maryland, Nebraska.
Yeah, that would probably have a little bit more significance on the bracket at least.
On that Memphis note, though, it's yes, they have the two Q3 losses, which obviously hurts their profile. But one of the other things, and I'm not the math guru, but there's such a huge disparity between their results and their predictives. And part of that reason, obviously, is that a lot of their wins have been relatively close compared to the competition that they've been playing.
Yeah.
And that's just not a way to up your net and up your predictives. And again,
Right.
I'm not saying they're not good wins, but you're beating, North Texas by 4 and UNLV by 6 and, just some other ones down the road that are, East Carolina by 4.
I was at the Charlotte game on the road, and they were up by 25 the whole game, and they let Charlotte finish the games for whatever reason on a 17-0 run, and they won by 9.
Yeah.
And it's just like, man, nobody's ever going to go back and watch this game. But the reality is they crushed them.
Yeah.
It's just hard because Memphis has like almost a full starting 5 of NBA players or NBA potential players. And human nature, it's like Gonzaga those years when the WCC was nothing,
Yeah. Well, yeah, like I said, ultimately to me, in some cases, results-based metrics really are more valuable. But in the world we live in today,
I know
the other things, how you win, also matters compared to expectations and all that. So
it bothers me a little bit because certain teams, like Drake, for example, they're never gonna. They could blow you out if you shoot like 4 for 40. But if you have an average shooting night, Drake's probably going to beat you by 5 to 10 because they're going to play this. They play the slowest tempo in the country, and they try to execute on every possession. They're actually not that great of a ball security team, but they play organized defense, rebound, all those little things that win basketball games. It's good team ball. They're freaking 21-2, but they're probably never going to move above the 11 line because they're not sexy.
Yeah,
Irvine too.
Irvine too, exactly.
Yeah, I really do think
they can pound you, though. They can pound you.
I do think this needs to be a more nuanced discussion in the future with the committee room. There are certain styles of play that are just going to absolutely dominate inferior competition.
Yeah.
And there are other styles of play that they're going to win, but they're just not going to put up those massive disparities from a scoring margin standpoint. And I really do hope we start to move towards that because it's just not a fair way to compare two teams who play a completely different style of basketball.
We saw what Duquesne did to sexy BYU last year, so there you have it.
Did anyone
Okay,
happen to
so
watch-
we got
I'll
we
bring
got
this up
teams
the
in
next dead air.
that we're going to add in. Okay. We're going to add Iowa State into the vote. I'm not adding in the field, into the vote.
Correct.
Arizona, Kentucky, and for some ungodly reason, this Kansas team made it.
Ew.
Oh,
Did Graham vote 3 times?
Yeah, what?
I voted for Duke, and Duke.
good man.
Okay, Shelby too.
So let the discussion begin.
How many are advancing from here, Tim?
We're gonna rank all these in the top 4. We'll get seated in that order. So
Gotcha.
order is important here.
Okay.
So on the teams to vote on, we're putting them in order, right?
Right, but do we want to have any discussion on any of these? We started to, and
Yeah, we got to talk Kentucky.
Yeah.
We only briefly mentioned them.
Well, take it away,
Kentucky's
Gary.
Kentucky's 7th best win is better than Wisconsin's best. Like, what the hell? How can they not be at least a full seed line ahead of the Badgers?
So I think with Kentucky, it's not just the great wins that stand out, but I look at, in particular, their worst team that they've played from a net standpoint in the top 2 quads is 42 Vanderbilt on the road. That is how does that even happen? How in the top 2 quads do you play 15 games against quads 1 and 2, and 42 is the worst net of an opponent? So I see what the resume metrics are: strength of record 17, KPI 10. I think KPI 10 wins above bubble 8. That's more so the range I think Kentucky belongs. I know what the predictive metrics say, but those wins are so elite. I feel like Kentucky really, for me, is just outside that top 2 seed line, but they're right there. And Iowa State, I think, is a team that belongs in that conversation as well.
I've got a stat for you, Graham. Out of these 8 teams that we're going to vote on, correct? Only 2 of them have 2 home losses, and they both start with the letter K.
But they both beat Duke on a neutral floor.
Just saying, these cathedrals that we call Fog Allen and Rupp Arena have seen 2 losses to their beloved Wildcats and Jayhawks. And I think the other big thorn in the Wildcats side is the fact that you could argue Arkansas bubbled this, bubbled that, but at the same time, they lost to an Arkansas team that was, I think, 1-6 in the league at the time and still fighting to get in. That's a bad home loss for a team in this territory.
Well, I think, Kansas has 3 home losses to West Virginia, Houston in regulation, and Houston again in overtime. I don't know why they keep blowing those leads.
Well, if we're
That's some message board chatter right there.
if we're talking about bad home losses to teams who aren't in the field, how about Iowa State getting that 19-point loss at home to Kansas State?
But it was a one-off, and it was after the Arizona Caleb Love game. So they had the natural built-in hangover, Kerry. But yeah, that was crazy, obviously.
I think Iowa State winning at Texas Tech is kind of a differentiator at that level. So, I think for me, Iowa State, if there is a team here that gets into that top 2 seed line, they would be the team for me. But I personally like the ones that we've already talked about as being considered for those overall top 8.
One team I'd love to see, I'm curious if you guys think that Houston might be a surprise on where they're placed. And I think back to a couple years ago when I forget how many quad 1 wins Kansas had. It felt like it was like 20. And then Houston ended up ahead of them on the 1 line based on just the unbelievable predictives. I think they might have won across the board at that point. I'm not even sure.
I think so.
They're 1-2-3 in the 3 predictive metrics. They are 6-0 on the road. I mean, I know they don't have the flashiest wins per se. That obviously they won it at in Lawrence, which is great. But other than that, there's a lot lacking in the resume too. But in the back of my mind, I'm still a little leery of them potentially being a lot higher on the 2 line than I think. I'm curious what you guys think about Houston. I could almost see them surprising at 5 or 6 when I almost feel like they should be on the back end of the 2 line in theory. But I'm curious what you guys think about Houston.
Yeah, it's a
Awesome defense.
No, there you go.
damn right. Great rebounding as always. I think I'm in a similar spot there. I think you could make the case to try to put them above A&M just based on the performance alone. That's the only way you could. A&M's got an incredible resume with the second most amount of wins against the field, depending on where you draw that line. But I've got them down for 10. Only Auburn with 11 has more than the Aggies. And then we already know Tennessee's much closer to the 1 line than they are the bottom of the 2 line. So I don't know if there's a world where you could put Houston above Tennessee, but perhaps there is. But I could certainly see you arguing them above A&M. And then I have Houston 7 overall, so I think that's a pretty safe bet. Even if they slip to 8, they're still a 2 seed. And then the other one I was going to mention to back you up, Graham, it surprised me. I figured Purdue would still be a 2 after that Michigan loss. It's obviously not a bad loss at all. They almost won the game. But Iowa State, to me, is actually winning just slightly on a comparison with Purdue. So that'll be interesting to see what the committee says there.
Yeah, I guess, Rocco, I ended up basically with Houston in the same spot, sort of by I'm not sure their resume, actual results of who they've beaten would get them to the very top of the 2 line. But I think their overwhelming metric numbers and their net rating of 3 is, the committee. I mean, we can, whether you like the net or you don't like the net, it is the NCAA's
baby.
It is their baby, right?
Yep.
So
no doubt. Yep.
Because, you can look at Houston and you could say, now granted, it was a 5-point loss, a 5-point loss, and a 3-point loss. But their best non-conference win is Notre Dame. So if we're going to start talking, if this year's committee starts talking about, well, what did you do out of conference? Houston doesn't have much of a leg to stand on.
Right.
So,
but the 3 of the 4 losses are overtime, and that's actually
exactly. That's what I'm saying. It
on
goes
the
back to
team
what
sheet,
you
it's
said
got
about
it in gray. Yeah.
Yeah, you have to throw that in. And of course, you could also then say, if you watch that Kansas game, you could say
4 overtime
Kansas
losses.
gave the game to them twice.
Yeah.
I prefer to think that Houston came back and won it, because you got to give the team credit for doing that.
Remember that game?
I actually I don't feel that way. I feel Kansas gave the game away, but that's I don't know why. For some reason, I feel that way.
Well, I can see that.
Free throws.
Anyway, my point is, Houston's really good, and I think they're going to end up on the 2 line because of their metrics and those close losses. But I could see an argument being made for Purdue that has many more significant wins still being ahead of them, and Houston falling in at the very end of the 2 line also.
And if they're at the very end of the 2 line, this is what I was saying before with my prediction. Like, I feel like Houston, you look at them in a grouping of 8 to 10 teams, you're like, wow, Houston's got to be at the top of that group. But then when you get down to scrubbing and you're comparing Houston to Purdue and Houston to Kentucky, you're just like, I don't know, maybe we should switch them. So yeah, I think if Houston is not 5 or 6, if they're 7 or 8, I think they get scrubbed down to a 3 seed when all is said and done. Because
I think
it's going to be
safe
if Houston is 8 and Kentucky is 9, the internet is going to lose its fucking mind.
Well, I'll say this: I have Houston. Sorry, Rocco.
Oh, I was just going to say this conversation is going away very quickly because they're about to go to both Arizona schools and play road games. They have to go to Texas Tech and they have to go to Baylor. Plus, they host Kansas and they host Iowa State. So we're going to have plenty of ingredients to play with in no time.
Yeah.
Right. Do you think that the committee is going to say they're number 3 in our tool that we created? They're outside the top 8.
No, I think they'll be in the top.
I don't.
Yeah, I think they'll be. I think they'll be on somewhere on the 2 line.
Yes. The Kansas road win can justify it from a resume standpoint as well.
I think Houston will be above Texas A&M, and I think it's not just because of the efficiency. We all know that's absolutely fantastic, but beyond there, they actually have the best win. At Kansas is better than anything Texas A&M has, even though Texas A&M has a lot more quality wins. Houston has the best win of the group, and then on top of that, Houston actually has a better quad 1 win percentage than Texas A&M, which almost seems hard to fathom when you look at what these teams did as far as the quality of their wins. But they do have a better quad 1 win percentage. And then on top of that, we've already talked about the 3 of 4 losses being in overtime. I think Houston's probably, and I think St. John's will be similar, in my opinion. The committee was going to cut a little bit of a break there because they realized just how close that resume is to being much, much better.
Rocco, I think I heard you earlier say something about A&M or Houston over A&M.
I think it's possible. I'm not.
Okay. All right. Well, I would like to point out to you, Mr. Pieces of Gold. Yep. Those are some nice pieces of gold they have there. A&M.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. They have
10.
They have arguably 10 wins against the field, depending on where you cut off your bubble. But
4 wins: Purdue, Texas Tech, Missouri, Ole Miss, all away from home.
Oklahoma away from home too on a road win.
Yeah. Well, I don't count Oklahoma, but I'm just talking in A1.
Them too.
1A.
Yeah. But that's why I'm so fascinated about this, because going back to similar to what happened a couple of years ago with Kansas and Houston, Houston was undeniably should have been behind KU based on the quality wins. But the committee decided, and I think Houston was number 1 in the net, I believe, as well. The committee decided to lean on the predictives and the net, slot them ahead, even though when you looked at results, there was no conceivable way it should have been that way. So I think I'm actually most fascinated by them in the reveal, because I think it will help us really understand how much they feel about the predictives and the net and where Houston should be.
I think they're going to Wichita.
Back to Shelby's point,
probably.
Would they leave the top 3 net team out of the top 8 2 years ago? Right, St. Mary's was 7, UConn was 8. Neither of them made the top 16. So I think they're willing to look at resume metrics more so than just their own predictive metric, which, let's be honest, the net is a predictive metric 100%.
Yeah, I looked, I keep track of this every year. Ones and twos are pretty much solid, okay? But they're in the top 2 or 3. There was a year where 3 got left out, got pushed all the way down. There's a year where 4 went way down to the bottom. So it does happen.
Yeah. One other point I just want to make quickly on this is, throughout the last month or so, there's been a really clear divide. Now Florida's creeping in as a 4th team, but on the net, we can't see the actual decimal points of how they're netting out, like how close 1 and 2 are and how close 3 and 5 are, and et cetera. But if you go to KenPom, which is on the team sheet, one of several, or Bart, you can do it as well on his, you'll clearly see that Auburn, Duke, and Houston are 3 like superior teams. Now, Florida, Tennessee creeping in at 4 and 5, but then there's a big drop off once you get down to 6, 7, 8 with Alabama, Iowa State, Purdue next on Kenny Pom Pom site as an example. But like that's another justification for the committee. If they are probably able to see that net decimal point, and they'll be like, these guys are 8, 9 points ahead of them. The difference between them and number 7, it might be the same as number 7 and number 20. So that could be another feather in the Cougars' cap.
Okay, let's move on here. We got teams to vote on. We need to rank these, and remember, as we're ranking them, the top 4 are going to go into that seed area as they're ranked. So make sure you're aware of that.
I already sent you mine, Tim. I thought
Got
we
it.
already done it.
Yeah, I do too.
Got it.
Ranking late, correct?
I do go when we're talking about this part. I think
In order?
Houston's going to be an interesting tell. I think Kentucky's going to be an interesting tell on Saturday to how the committee looks at a few of those things, and then Texas A&M. That kind of grouping right there. Those are 3 that's going to be real interesting for me to see. And then Texas Tech, for the reasons we alluded to. Carrie's point, where the predictive metrics are very good, resumes are okay. Incredible win at Houston, split with Arizona, but Tech also has those early, that loss to St. Joseph's early on too, by a point, but still.
And was in that, did losing to St. Joseph's keep them from playing Texas in that tournament, or something happened there?
I believe it was like, because it was on the 21st November. I want to go. I'd have to go back and look. But I want to say
they ended up playing.
That's
They
correct.
played
The
Syracuse instead because they lost that game, so that hurt them.
Yeah.
One thing I am interested in, Dave talked about Texas A&M, and I think Texas A&M is a very interesting team on where exactly they're going to be seated. I'm confident it's a 2 seed, but the positioning there, I think, could be a bit of a tell for the SEC at large. I think Auburn, Alabama, 1-2, slam dunk. And I think you have to have Tennessee and Florida there too. But here's something that's really caught my eye recently. Auburn, better resume metrics than quality metrics. Alabama, better resume than quality. Florida, better resume than quality. Tennessee, basically equal, 5 versus 5.3. Texas A&M, better resume than quality. Kentucky, better resume than quality. Ole Miss, better resume than quality. Missouri, basically equal, 22-21. Mississippi State, better resume than quality. Oklahoma, better resume than quality. Vanderbilt, better resume than quality. All the way down the path for the SEC. Their resume metrics are fantastic because they keep loading up on quality wins, and they're not taking any bad losses because they can't take any bad losses. So their resume metrics are absolutely fantastic. I do wonder if the committee's going to start to look at some of those SEC teams and say, are we really comfortable with this many SEC teams this high up the bracket, when if we really do want a balanced national bracket, some of these teams might need to be seated a little bit lower to make sure we're doing it that way.
Graham, did you know the SEC is only 82-82 in conference play?
That boggles my
just
mind,
not good.
Carl. That boggles my mind. And I read that the other conferences are pretty much the same way.
Did you see Mark Pope's interview today where they asked him about that? That
No,
was phenomenal. Oh, you got to look that up.
Did anyone happen to watch? I think Andy Katz published it a couple weeks ago. Did anyone happen to watch the interview that he did with all the metrics guys?
Yes,
Did anybody
yes,
see that? So it was interesting because they had Ken Pa- Ken Palm was on there and he like seemed completely disinterested, by the way. It was actually really
yes, he did.
hilarious. He was just like, yeah, I don't think my metrics like he basically was like, don't even use my metric. It was very weird. But what was interesting about it is basically all the predictive guys, so Bart, Ken, and whoever the guy was for ESPN, were basically like, yeah, we've told the committee that they should look at the resume metrics more for seeding.
Hmm.
And that's been stuck in my mind since then. It's a little bit of a mind F. And I don't know if it'll actually come to fruition, but that's kind of something I'm really looking for in the reveal to see if there's a trend there, because it was pretty clear that they said that they've told the committee and emphasized that they feel that there is a role for their metric, the efficiency metrics, but that they should rely more in seeding on the resume metrics and that those are better served for that. It hasn't been that way necessarily in the past. I would encourage you guys to watch it if you haven't, or maybe don't if you really don't want it to screw with your head while you're putting your bracket together. But that is probably the biggest thing I'm looking for in the top 16, because I just genuinely, after watching that, was kind of felt like I was thrown for a complete loop.
I used to always, back in the day when we were using RPI, right? I would pull in RPI data and KenPom data, and I would weight it doubly on RPI, half on KenPom. And I feel like that's kind of the way it should go now, where you should almost take like double strength of record, double KPI, double wins above bubble, take single of BPI, whatever, KenPom and Torvik, average those 9, sort it, and you probably have a bracket right there.
Okay, we got what I find very interesting results. Tennessee 5, but then Houston 6, A&M 7, Purdue 8.
Okay.
I would say, yeah, to me that looks pretty much like I thought. It was really going to be as to what order you put A&M and Houston.
And we can discuss that in the scrum.
All right, yeah. So to get to the group,
reasonable.
so then we have teams in the field right there. Those 8: Illinois, Marquette, Michigan, Michigan State, Ole Miss, St. John's, Texas Tech, Wisconsin. Just need them
In order.
in order, yes.
No, just picking. I guess it does have to be in order, doesn't it?
Yeah, we'll put them in order, and now we can have discussion right now on them if you want to. But we need to put them in order. Then the 4 that are the lowest will be our 17 through 20. They'll be under consideration. The other 4 will go with Arizona, Kentucky, Kansas, Iowa State, and we will work on those for seeding.
I think for me, a couple teams stand out in that I just don't think Illinois and Michigan State have done enough to be a part of this grouping when you look at what some of the other teams are there. So kind of as far as Ole Miss, Marquette, I can see the arguments for them being up there. I just, for 2 teams in particular, Illinois and Michigan State, I don't think they've done enough to be a part of the top 16 at this point.
Yeah, I back you up on that, Graham. Yeah, Michigan State is really plummeted after that Indiana home loss. I was actually looking for something opposite. I wanted something to add some meat to the bone, and instead they somehow got skinnier. So yeah, I'm all the way out on Michigan State for this part of the bracket. Illinois, we've talked about. I agree. Like, the injuries matter. How much? It's hard to quantify. Yes, this is probably Big Ten's best chance for a Final Four team. Just with when they're playing full speed at their highest level, they look like a national title contender, perhaps. But you can't have 8 losses, and you can't have a home loss to USC. I don't care who put on the uniform that day. If you want to be in this and at this stage of the season.
Yeah, that was by far the biggest head shaker.
Yeah, they lost by 10 too. It wasn't even like a fight.
They got off to a bad start, and
Yeah,
I don't
they're out of
know,
whack.
the whole game
Yeah.
they just looked like, for whatever, it's just They just had one of those days that they just weren't there, man.
Yep.
Mentally, whatever. They tried to make it a game for a little bit, but just didn't have it that day. They just weren't there. So I don't know what was going on, but
I think that's important because
but they're a young team too. I mean, people forget that literally four of their top four contributors in terms of scoring are all basically freshmen or first year players.
Yeah, it's an amazing haul.
And then they add a fifth in their top six. So I mean,
they're great players.
You're going to get every once in a while you get one of those games because they're like, oh, that's right. It's a long season. It's the end of January, and we're kind of tired at this point.
Well, it's the same thing with San Diego State, but they just don't have as much talent as these Illinois guys. But they're facing the same thing. They're so much younger than they usually are, and
they hit a wall. I mean, you see teams every once in a while for a couple of games. They just
it's a long season.
Hit a wall, especially with all the travel.
Oh God.
And now it's cross country. You're going from Rutgers to UCLA. I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah, it's nuts.
Yeah, San Diego State. I saw them in Vegas, and they looked awesome early. I mean, they did. They looked great.
The young guys are awesome, but they're going to have those nights where they might lose to Wyoming or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, they played. I think they went Creighton, Houston.
Yeah, they beat both Creighton and Houston. That's what's keeping them very, very relevant. But, thank God for them. They got those wins.
Now, Creighton was without Ashworth that game, so that's out Ashworth and Pop. That's, Creighton can't win a game like that.
So are we voting in order?
Yeah, we can go ahead and vote. You got to, we're just picking 4 here, so it doesn't you have to rank them. You have to rank them. Yeah,
have to rank all 8, right?
Yeah, correct.
Column C, is that right?
Yeah, the teams in the field under that one, the 8 we haven't talked about yet or voted on yet.
Okay.
Did we already talk about the question in the chat for how does the committee weigh Kentucky's losses without Butler and Carr, who are 2 starters?
They don't.
I think my impression is that this usually comes up in the committee room, maybe carries some more weight for certain committee members than others. But at the end of the day, basically every team has injuries that they have to deal with throughout the course of the year. You're hard pressed to find any team who doesn't have starters out at some point. So unless it's a very significant injury for a prolonged period of time, I tend to think it doesn't have a whole lot of effect on most teams.
No,
here's what I think. Here's what I
100%.
think they when they want an excuse, when somebody says, "Why did you have this team 5?" Well, they were missing some players and then they it's just kind of a built-in excuse for them in my book. I don't know. I'm sure they talk about it. I'm sure it's brought up, but in the bottom line, I don't know how much effect it has.
If you put asterisks on every game where someone was injured or somebody had the flu or mono or whatever, it would be 80% asterisk. You should asterisk the games when everybody's healthy.
Trying to gauge how to weigh that.
Yeah. To me, the only time it's really come into play is when you see somebody get hurt and they're obviously out for the rest of the year
in the tournament,
and they have a period of time to evaluate the team as a whole collectively. How did you perform with them and without them? Maybe from a seeding standpoint, or if some player like we've seen before gets hurt, like in a conference tournament or something, and they're going to make it, and they have to evaluate. They may lose a seed line or something because they don't know how they're going to be without that player.
Well, they only got 4. Rocco only got 4 numbers from you.
Yeah, I thought we were picking 4 out of column C.
No, you got to do all 8. Rank all 8. I'm sorry.
No, that's cool.
Dave, that's very much like 2023 with Rutgers when they lost Mawat Mag and then really leaked oil down the stretch. And they were a very different team without him. And it was pretty clear that they judged what Rutgers did after that injury versus what they did before.
I think injury-wise, the committee is more likely to look at, and I think it was Tim that mentioned it earlier, that St. John's best win came at Connecticut when they didn't have Liam McNeely. I think they'll question whether the wins are good enough more than they'll discount the losses in situations like that.
Well, if you guys remember too, I mentioned this to Graham when we did a Twitter space, I don't know, a month ago or so. And again, I don't know if this goes back to Tim's point where it's just using it as an excuse or if it actually came up in the committee room. But the whole Big East, I call it a fiasco for the league last year, not only getting 3 teams. But if you remember what McClellan said when he was pressed on each team, he specifically for Seton Hall mentioned the fact that they beat UConn when UConn was missing Donovan Clingan. Now, the funny thing about that was he mentioned that specifically in his reasoning for one of the reasons why Seton Hall was left out. And the funny thing about that game was that Clingan was actually only out for the second half, and Seton Hall was already winning when he went out. And he also mentioned a game when Seton Hall beat Rutgers. They actually lost to Rutgers, but he said that they beat them without Jeremiah Williams. It just was crazy. I've never heard a committee chair mention that before. I was kind of caught off guard. So I don't know if that was just an excuse or something they actually legitimately did talk about in.
I think they
Seton
do
Hall.
legitimately talk about it. I think when it comes down to vote, that kind of goes to the back of their mind.
Goes to the back of their mind. Yeah,
That's just my opinion.
I think that's fair. I think it's very
Lenardi
fair.
just put his top 16 on the screen.
Shit.
Memphis, Rocco. What do we got?
Michigan
He put
State.
Michigan State. He's got Michigan State in there.
State.
He's got Michigan
Oh.
State in there.
Joey,
Sorry, I had to say that. That just cracks me up.
I think Mike DeCourcy has Michigan State on the 1 line. Same with Andy Katz.
Oh, shit. I've got UC
Top
San Diego
overall
on the
seed.
1 line.
I almost got Kerry to spit out his Guinness. So
I
was
almost
glad.
just had Guinness come out my nose, man.
All right, who's this last team? Oh yeah, Lenardi's boys.
Actually, I was telling
They were
Dave
at the bottom
earlier,
of mine as
Joe
well.
texted me. He is going to try and join us at some point, but I don't know.
Hell yeah.
Today,
Oh, that'd be
today
awesome.
or next month.
No, this one. But he's
Oh,
in
really?
he's in the war room in Bristol, so he wasn't sure.
Yeah, I'm looking at him right now.
This may be
Is
pre-recorded.
he he's in the bracket bunker,
True.
Rocco?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, quote unquote, yeah.
I think my favorite was it the first year that we did this that Joe jumped on for a little bit and one of us said something about like, yeah, in the reveal they did this. And he was like, I don't even think they knew why they did that in the reveal.
He's right about that. He's right about that.
Joe, I do think Joe gets too much crap.
Oh,
I think
absolutely.
He's one of the more accessible and open guys compared to some of the other ones that have a major platform, in my opinion.
Even if you disagree with what he says, he can back it up. Like he's easily
Yes.
the best of the, forward facing bracketologists out there. Hands down.
Yeah, I agree.
He's got his little spiel ready on any team. It's pretty funny.
Another question in the chat. How does the committee view the fringe wins? So the ones teetering on low Q1, high Q2, they could be one or other depending on the week. And I think that's a big thing that comes up all the time, at least in the media, right? The quad wins is what gets brought up. But I think as far as bracketologists, as far as what the committee does, they drill down to the actual wins. Like whether the game is against 75 or 76, it's either good or it's not, and it shouldn't oscillate day to day based on a team's net. I do think it is interesting with Kansas State now. All of a sudden, they're 60 something in the net,
68, 69.
Yeah, I think you need to, for a team like that, you need to look at when the win happened. But I mean, it's either a good win or it's not. I don't think whether it's quad 1 or quad 2 matters as much as we bring it up all the time, as much as it looks pretty on a graphic to put on ESPN or anything like that.
I don't think those in a vacuum necessarily matter that much, but I do think, to Graham's point earlier, with a team like Wisconsin, when they come with volume, even if they're not super significant individually, and the win percentage is high, that's when it matters. But in a vacuum individual, that is. One thing I would add to that too is I don't think the committee has shown too much, I guess, lack of deference towards high end Q3 losses either. Teams that lose to the 85th team in the net at home. It just doesn't seem like they've really damaged teams too strongly for that in the past. Now in volume, yes, I think that's when you get into the Memphis situation, or someone like A&M, who I think had four quad three losses, but they just had a ton of wins to outweigh that. But quad fours to me seem a little bit more difficult to ignore, and lower end quad threes than I think committee knocking you for losing to the 80th team at home.
Yeah, I think you look at Texas A&M a couple of years ago when they landed a 7 seed. I think I may have had them as a 5 seed. I can't remember if I had them as a 5 or 6, but I think I went 5 seed and missed them by 2 lines. And it was very clear the committee went out of their way to punish their 2 quad 4 losses. But to your point, Anthony, looking at North Carolina last year, they actually had a quad 3 loss when it came time for bracket preview time. Didn't seem to hurt them. They were actually 5th overall at that time, and it surprised a lot of people because they were higher up the seed list than we thought they'd be at the bracket preview. Of course, they moved up to 4th overall at the end of the day. But yeah, I tend to agree. I don't think a Q3 loss tends to hurt so bad. If you get them at volume and you add multiple Q3 losses, I think it tends to hurt a little bit more. And certainly the quad 4s, the committee has punished pretty significantly.
Well, and this one too. I mean, I think this is probably, it will be more of a discussion next month, but I do think there's some at least data to bear out that when you're talking about, regardless if they're at the bottom of the quad 1 or top of quad 2, you get in those scenarios. How many of these teams are teams that are, quote, in the field, or they anticipate to make the field? How many wins against the field do you have? For a little bit of deference for seeding, maybe not at the very top, but in some middle, and particularly down towards the bubble, you're comparing teams. Well, how many of these wins that you have are actually against teams that we are going to have in our field, as opposed to, because you could have 3 wins at the very bottom of quad 1 and none of those teams are necessarily close to making the tournament. Yeah. So I think that is a point of discussion, not so much at the very top here, because all these teams we're talking about overall resumes don't, they stand out enough to be where they are. But when you start getting in the middle and lower end of the bracket, that kind of stuff matters.
Yeah, I look forward to having that conversation around SMU, Dave, in a few weeks. Specifically around SMU.
Yeah. Well, basically, I mean, SMU has it's a better than a small major, but it's kind of like a mid-major profile in a more major conference, because they haven't beaten anybody that would be in the field right now. Right. And I don't know, you guys a little more, I don't remember off the top of my head, but it's very hard to get an at-large bid if you don't have any quad 1 wins at all.
Well, what did NC State have that year? Yeah, I think NC State was 1-5 or 1-6 that year they got in as an 11 seed.
That one year Notre Dame got in, they were like 4-9 against quads 1 and 2. That broke my mind.
2 years ago, NC State.
Like I said, the committee's done some weird things, but like to have like literally no wins against team in quad 1, I think that would be a very dangerous scenario to find yourself in.
Let's we're getting close. We're over 2 hours here, so let's do teams to vote on. Okay, so we got those. We're now picking 3 seeds basically. Okay.
All right.
From those 8, before you vote, though, I mean, is there any discussion? Also, I want to throw this point of parliamentarian out here. Okay, so we have these. I don't remember how we did it other years, but we have these. Then we'll have 4 left over. So I mean, we're going to rank these. So then the bottom 4 would go into 13 through 16. Okay, that's how we'll do it, and then we can just do a quick scrub and make sure. If anyone has a problem with somebody down at the bottom, not moving, whatever. Okay, got it?
Okay.
So we're ranking 1 to 8 in column E.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, do you have any more discussion on yeah, this is pretty much gone now. So any on teams to vote on? Is there any discussion needed? It's kind of a big vote because we're putting 3 and 4 in there.
Oh, I'm good with them.
I'd like to hear why Marquette belongs. Go ahead, Tim.
That's all, Tim.
Oh, well, put it on me, Rocco. Thanks.
That's
You
your
got
job.
Memphis out and you got Marquette in. Come on, man.
I will go to my
Oh.
grave on Memphis. Okay. I think their resume is pretty damn good, and they went out and played people, but it is what it is.
Can
All
you
right.
show the?
So-
Can you share the list again?
There's Marquette.
We can't see anything.
Load.
Oh, okay. And what about the list? The spreadsheet list?
Yeah, one
Oh,
second here, but Kerry asked me about Marquette, so I wanted to have them up to.
Oh yeah. Go ahead.
Okay.
mean,
Well, I
do
mean,
think that
First of all, I think we
teams-
talked about this earlier. They got Purdue, Maryland, Wisconsin, Georgia, 4 tournament teams they beat, all non-conference. They beat Creighton. That's 5 tournament teams.
Georgia's debatable.
Yeah.
Right, you're right.
Georgia's
Fringe,
tight. Yeah.
just
They're
like
close
Xavier's
enough.
a fringe.
They're close enough. They're better than Xavier.
11 wins in quad 1 and 2. Predictive metrics not bad. Result based a little bit better. They're 19-6.
I guess I'm mostly curious how we ended up with Marquette over St. John's in particular.
Well, I mean, if you compare the 2 resumes, it's basically not very close.
I agree.
Marquette.
Not in the way that you're saying, though.
Wait,
Tim- Tim,
I'm just now
Marquette-
realizing that St. John's wasn't part of this vote. Tim, I need to resend you some votes. I put St. John's in there and didn't vote on Marquette because I thought St. John's had made the list, not Marquette.
I'll say this, Tim, to back you up.
Scrub it.
Marquette's the only team in the country that's won at Maryland. Nobody else has won in that building.
I feel like you had that stat ready last year, too, about UCLA, right?
I've got that stat for everybody, Kerry. That's why I'm here.
I mean, that's 3 top
Well, it
20
always
wins
blows
there.
me. It gives you an idea of how hard it is to win there. If a couple teams can do it, it's less special.
I do think Marquette's going to get a lot of credit for what they did out of conference, at least scheduling wise, too. I think when push comes to shove, to get them into, the
Yeah, and I'm using
line
the
or 4 line.
Wisconsin deal from last year. There's kind of the same kind of resume where they had a losing streak. That's a tough gauntlet in the Big East. You can rack up a lot of wins, but you play that, they just played the gauntlet and lost all 3. It wasn't like they lost to bad teams. They lost to 3 teams that, are in the tournament. So it wasn't
one
like,
thing- Yeah, Tim, just to piggyback on that too, though, I think it's pretty important for them to not go 0-2 on their last 2 games of the year against UConn and St. John's, because that would put them one
right. But
one
we're
and-
not,
1 and
we're looking
5.
at it today.
Right. I'm just saying, they're 1-3 against the top of the Big East, right? And their only win was at home against Creighton.
Yes.
So I do think that works against them pretty significantly. And the committee was very specific about that last year when they left St. John's out. They cited that specifically on how they did against the top of the bracket. So it'll be interesting to see if that comes into play at the reveal too.
I would also point out, Kerry, that Marquette has 3 top 20 wins. St. John's has 3 wins in all of Q1. None of which are top 20.
That's more of an at-bats conversation, though. It's like, how many at-bats did you get?
0.
I think I agree with Kerry. I think they're close. I think their resumes are close. I would lean.
I don't
Marquette, but
think,
I think they're
I
close.
don't think it's slam dunk, but I had it down to like 4 teams today, and Marquette slipped in.
Marquette's the only team in this consideration that went to overtime against DePaul.
There we go. Now I'm back on
How
the
about that?
Rocco train.
Now that,
Marquette is-
now that puts you on the bubble if you do that.
They struggled with
Marquette
DePaul
is
twice,
outside
actually.
the top. Marquette is outside the top 20 in 5 of the 7 metrics. Like that's
They also lost
That-
at home twice. They have 2 home losses. They're in that
Yeah.
club. The 2 home
Joe,
losses.
I'm getting pounded here. You need to step in and help me.
Why would I want to do that?
Oh shit!
Hey, Joe.
How's it going, fellas?
What's up,
Good
Joe?
to see you.
Tim's
Good
trying to
see
go to
all of
bat
you.
for Marquette in the top 16.
Where did I have Marquette today? Not in the top 16, I don't think. Just
Not
outside.
Not according to the halftime show I just watched, Joe.
They weren't on the board, were they?
No,
No.
they
It
weren't.
does run together after a while, but yeah, no, no. I just wanted to say hi. I really have nothing substantial to contribute other than this is an opportunity for me to embarrass Tim in front of a larger group.
Fair.
Do
Fair.
that well.
I do have this crazy thought. If you'll just indulge me for like 90 seconds.
Sure.
Like, call me nuts, okay? But on our digital platform now, beyond streaming on ESPN Plus, right? They broadcast shows on the app, including like a countdown to game day, which I can't imagine anyone actually watches on Saturday morning, but like they're desperate, so I'm on it. Like I'm not joking. Like this weekend next year, this thing that you're doing should be streamed by us. You know, a little fancier,
Yeah.
right?
That'd be
But
awesome.
like I have
We take that.
I have long thought well, now it's 12 people in the room, right? Not 10, but I've long thought about getting 10 or 12 reputable people playing their roles and doing that. And because I do think that there's enough of a nerd population that would be into this, banter, right? And, and it could be maybe two episodes, one of the banter and one of the bracket building, which it seems to me that the public still doesn't get to a large degree, in spite of one of us being fairly public about it for quite a few years. No, but you know what I'm saying, and I don't know if you guys are comfortable with that. I think I'm going to pitch it.
Yeah,
Do
well,
it.
we talked
You
about
guys
it.
would all
years
be
ago.
on the list.
Joe.
I love it.
You and I talked about this a couple years ago.
100
You
years
thought-
ago, I
yeah,
know.
Yeah.
I feel like I thought of it before COVID, but there wasn't a platform bad enough on our network that would maybe put us on it. Right? Like we
Now
can be honest with ourselves. We're not going to be on any magazine covers anytime
No.
soon.
Now there's the ACC network. We could just be on there 24/7 this year.
Well, the problem with that is, they don't have any good teams.
Yeah, that's my point.
Yeah, they didn't like it last year when they had me down to the coaches meeting and I said, our perception, our PR. I said, you don't have a perception problem. I said, you have a basketball problem.
Yeah.
And I can prove, man, they really like that. I mean, 6 of them have since retired. So, anyhow, who knows? It's probably a long shot. Hey, Shelby,
Howdy.
probably a long shot, but I think it would be a hoot.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely.
Plus, it would give me a chance to actually interact with you guys for a change. And I would like that.
I think that'd be good for all of
Joe,
us.
we're in, Joe.
All right, good deal. And Rocco, that's really nice, residence inn you're in or wherever the heck you're at.
I got an AC hotel, baby. Yeah, getting ready for Missouri, Georgia on Saturday.
Oh, that's not bad. That's not bad.
Yeah. Just got into
Good for you.
town in time for the Zoom. It's good.
I'm not going to make it to Vegas that week this year. It's it's been like every other year it's kind of worked.
Yeah.
And
That's a good. We'll take you once every 2 years. That
it
works.
kind of floats. I never know, like, is St. Joe's any good and how early are we going to play in that A10 tournament? And how quickly are they going to lose so I can get released, to come here? And when it's not in Brooklyn, it just makes it harder. Because, like, I can almost commute there.
Right.
Like, I can do a noon or 2 o'clock game there and still be here at dinner time.
I saw this morning they're on track to get the 4 seed, which is big because that'll be a double bye.
Yeah, they're on track
showing
because their league schedule is really front loaded.
Yeah.
But easiest team in America to scout. And I'll give you the scouting
I don't
report.
disagree. I don't disagree with you.
Uh-oh. I got peeps. So I gotta go.
All right.
I'll try
see
and
you,
come
Joe.
back if I can later.
All right, later.
Bye, Joe.
See you, Joe.
All right.
Joe.
Hey, good luck, fellas.
Thanks.
Take care.
Send me the finished product so I don't have to do a bracket.
All right.
Later.
Well, Rocco, back to your point about at bats. I mean, they didn't play a very good non-conference schedule. That's why they didn't get those at bats. Marquette
that's
got
fair.
at bats against Purdue and Maryland and took care of business.
They did. They did. And the Maryland one really makes things interesting. That's why I'm not 100% sold either way. If they didn't have that, and I get it, Maryland's not a top 4 in the, reveal / this discussion. But I will say, by Maryland's performances and what the net tells us, that might be a top 4 seed level road win because A, they're almost impossible to beat there. B, their net is pretty close to 16. Maybe it is 16. So that makes Marquette more interesting for sure.
Yeah, and they did play 2 of those 3 away from home of the Big 4. So,
Tim, can you put that list back up on the screen?
oh yes, sir.
Yeah.
I was in the process of voting and we got talking, which was great. And I'm just trying to remember exactly.
Who was on there?
Yeah, I mean, I think I know, but I'm like, I don't want to leave somebody out and vote for the wrong person.
Hey, Graham.
Yeah, if you'd really help me out, I had to kind
deserve to be up there.
of figure out what you were doing last time. So make sure you get 8 different numbers on this one. All right.
Shelby, I just saw your shirt. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
Graham was rocking the mock committee shirt for our pod last night.
Oh, letting it fly.
Oh man.
You didn't throw it in the wash last night, Graham, and then rewear it today?
Oh yeah, man. I just tend to sleep through it, throw it in the dirt, rub it around a little bit, put it right back on.
Yeah, I like that. It's that time of year. Basketball, don't even need to change clothes.
By the way, don't hold your breath. Joe's brought this up to me about 3 or 4 times and it's never happened. So
I've heard it. He brings it up to me in Vegas too, Tim. So yeah, I feel like I've heard
yeah,
it.
that's great, Joe. Do something about it.
Yeah, no kidding.
Well, he's always invited me if, like, when Creighton plays Providence, if he's in ESPN, to come and then go to ESPN with him. And so I think that would be the tick, go
Yeah.
see somebody who has a little bit of. He did talk to some higher ups, and they thought it was a decent idea, but it never went any further.
He's really got to follow through and pursue it if it's going to happen, probably.
We got another question in the chat. Does margin of victory ever matter at all when splitting hairs? Didn't Marquette beat Purdue and Wisconsin by almost 20 each? They certainly did, spank both of those teams.
I think
Well,
some of that stuff's already showing up in the data. So
Right,
Yeah.
right.
you should probably look harder if you're still stuck.
Where I think it can be useful is I think there are certain games that the committee tends to be more likely to watch and to remember. For example, I think Auburn, Iowa State is one of those games that they'll probably, even though that was all the way back in Maui, it will leave an impression for the entire season. And I think Marquette, to their credit, the way they started the season, I think there is that impression of, hey, this is a team that was one of the top teams in the country. So even if they have fallen a little bit, I think going back to that Iowa State Marquette game, yes, Iowa State won in Ames, but Marquette also looked the part, even in a loss there. So sometimes I think the impression the committee members get really matters, even besides the efficiency metrics.
Did the committee also watch the game against George Mason in the Marquette Classic where they almost lost that game?
You're talking about the potential A-10 champions, George Mason Patriots.
I know I am. I'm not throwing shade on my Fairfax Warriors, but that was like a tie game with 4 minutes left.
all I'll say is you can't sit there on one hand and go, well, look, they lost 3 games by 7 points, and then not take into consideration when a team wins by 20 either. So you'll drive yourself nuts doing that.
Yeah. Well, I think the whole head-to-head thing, fans tend to focus in on that stuff.
Sure,
But
yeah.
but the reality is, it very rarely, if ever, comes into play. Now if teams play, if you're down to a seed line or you're down to a final team in, and they played each other twice, and one team beat them at both places, and the resumes are otherwise pretty close, I think that's a factor to consider. Because otherwise, it just becomes this endless loop of, well, if you have to be in front of them because you beat them, but then you have to be behind them because you lost to them. It just becomes a never-ending circle, and that's just not the way it works.
Now you're doing a power ranking.
Yeah, that's how you end up with Mississippi Valley State as your national champion.
Don't tell Memphis fans that Arkansas State should be in front of them due to head-to-head. They don't like that one very much.
No. No.
Memphis fans they're pushing up against the brink of Providence fans, which tracks because they have a very similar profile from for years.
I don't know. Arkansas State's a good squad, and I don't know how much the committee's really going to. I know that is a home loss, but that's a potential Sun Belt champ at the end of the day. I'm not sure how much they're going to truly hold that against Memphis at the end of the day.
I don't think it would be that bad if it was one game, but now that they have
two
loss, now I think you kind of get the double whammy of bad efficiency plus multiple Q3 losses.
Well,
I think you get one mulligan. No matter who you are, you get one mulligan. If you have two losses outside the top two quads, then it does become a problem.
Yeah.
Anthony, have you sent me your vote yet?
I believe I did. Maybe not. Did I not do that? I thought I did.
Send it to me again. I didn't get it.
Yeah.
Hold on. Let me just double check my numbers here and make sure this last one is the right one.
Speaking of winning at margin, Memphis is hopefully going to win comfortably tonight. Looks like it.
Yeah, I got to turn that game off and put on the Maryland game. What am I doing?
It is just over 4 minutes to go. Maryland's 73-67.
Yep. I mean, that's huge for Nebraska if they can come back.
Well, the thing about Memphis, though, they could well end up, depending on how they finish the season, somewhere 5-7. But that team, to Rocco's point earlier, has a lot of talent on it, and is not going to be a team that's going to be a lot of fun for a second round opponent to play. Potentially, if they can get out of their own way.
I think they deserve to be in the conversation for a 4 seed. I think they're going to be a 5 seed, and they're going to be the primary team that everybody picks for the 12/5 upset, and then they might make the Elite 8.
Who's that?
Memphis.
Memphis. Okay.
Yeah.
While I get these last ones tallied here, do you guys want to start talking about the top line, and if there's any debate or changes there, or
for the 1 seeds?
Yeah, that's start scrubbing a little bit.
1 through 8 is exactly what my seed list is right now, so I'm fine with it.
I was going to say literally the top 8, 1 through 8 exact order I have them in. So I don't have any that's to pick personally.
I'm probably the one. I have Texas. I just have Texas A&M and Houston flipped.
Same here, but I also have Iowa State above Purdue. But that's the Iowa State's not even in yet, so I guess I can't make that argument right now.
I think it's a close call, Rocco. I ended up with Purdue.
It's really close. Yeah.
I ended up with Purdue in that spot, but I went back and forth on it. To me, sometimes who you can lose to also matters. Of course, Purdue lost at Penn State, but that was before Penn State kind of tanked. But
they were so good the first 2 months, and now they just can't beat anybody.
But Iowa State's 19-point home loss was kind of the differential for them and Purdue. But it's I could go back and forth. The only other thing I would say, and this goes back to the overall strength of schedule, right? Purdue, has 14 wins against the top 2 quads. Iowa State only has 10. And I point this out later, but there's that little thing in the top corner over there You know, Purdue is
There he is. Average net wins. Here comes Dave.
Yes.
Is under 90. Do you know how hard it is to have an average net win under 90?
It is hard.
Really hard.
Because it means you can't schedule. Not only do you have to beat a lot of people, you can't schedule many bad teams at all because the average is just.
Yeah, it's skewed.
I mean, Purdue has played one team ranked
Hey,
above.
excuse me,
200.
Dave. Excuse me, Dave. I got a point here. Anthony, you didn't have
I agree.
Iowa State on your list.
I didn't. Did I mess up the numbers? Hold on. They should be.
Yeah, you've got
Right.
teams.
Oh yeah, you're right. Hold on. I'll
You
send.
got teams that aren't even in there on your list.
Hold on. I got you.
Come
Like
on,
searching up
rookie.
and down trying to find Iowa State.
Which one? I'm trying to think of who I added that wasn't on there.
I
Hold on.
couldn't get out of the whole evening without bringing up the average net win just for Kerry.
I was waiting for it. We had pieces of gold from
Got
Rocco.
Arizona. You had
There
St.
you go.
John's in there.
Oh,
You
okay,
had-
I got you. Yep, I
Do
see.
you have,
it.
your, do you have a
Oh,
bingo
yeah,
card,
the-
Kerry?
I got
No,
you.
but Anthony brought in like strokes and golf. Like everybody's got something, and I'm
That's
glad
the
Dave
wrong
brought
one,
his
and-
specialty.
Yeah, okay.
Me too.
But I mean, if you just think of, I mean, for example, Iowa State has played 6 teams ranked 200 or higher in the net, all of them in the non-conference.
Yeah.
Purdue played 1. So if you look at effective record, Purdue basically would be 18-6. And Iowa State would lose 6 wins, so they'd be 13-5. So to me, that's enough of a difference. Now, you know, had Iowa State beaten Auburn on that neutral floor, that's a game changer.
Yeah, true.
But you know, I don't know. It's a coin flip for me. I don't think it's wrong or right one way or the other. But that's how I ended up with Purdue at my number 8 spot.
That was my before the season. I always do a like ranking the top 25 non-conference games of the year, and Iowa State Auburn was number 1 on the list because of the implications at stake there. Like it was obvious that whoever won that game was going to have major opportunities. That was huge. If Iowa State wins that game, we might be viewing them. I mean, obviously, they then lost 3 of their last 5, but Iowa State would have been in Auburn's boots right now.
Yeah. No, it's super close. There's a lot to like on both sides, I think. It's just the extra loss that keeps standing out to me. But all of Purdue's losses are in the top quad, so it's really not a bad loss per se. It's just the quantity. And it's on the road record, too, where they're both good, 7-5 versus 7-4 away neutral. Everything else is so even. Besides, Iowa State's got the K-State black eye home loss. But again, justifiable, I guess, after a 60-footer goes in. I don't know. So, yeah, it's interesting. And obviously, the thing to like about the Cyclones is the much I'll take that win at Texas Tech over the win at Oregon as a stronger road win.
I mean, and this comes down to depth, right, versus maybe just strength. Because, I mean, you know, Purdue played Auburn on a neutral court, and it wasn't close. Iowa State played Auburn on a neutral court, and it was very close.
Lost by two.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's that, too. That's why I'm saying it's really a matter. We could go.
Can't go wrong. Like
It's why they have a vote, right? I mean, we could go around the room, and you could have 9 people, and 5 feel one way, and 4 feel the other.
I spent several. Yeah. Sorry, one last thought. I spent several hours talking trash about Iowa State last year. So it feels very odd to be on their side today.
One last thought about Purdue.
Nebraska's
They have
backward in
7
two.
games against Quad 1A and only 5 games against Quads 3 and 4 combined. That's pretty impressive. Very, very skewed to the top of the profile.
If we're talking strength of schedule, where are my boys Kentucky at? Number 2 nation.
No way.
Are we voting at this point on calling me?
No, we're not voting on anything. There was a mix-up, so I had to straighten it out.
Sorry, Sheldon.
Tim's doing math. That's that sound you're hearing.
You told us the last couple of years you rooted for Duke. Now you're saying you root for Kentucky?
No, I'm a Duke fan. I am. I got Christian, not behind me right now, but I got Christian Laettner, JJ Redick jerseys in my office. But
Then
I'm
what's
not a
with this
Kentucky.
Kentucky love?
I'm not a Kentucky fan at all. I just like their resume.
I thought I heard you say my boys.
I did because I've been pimping Kentucky all night. If Kentucky is number 8 at the reveal, you guys are going to remember that your boy Carey told you.
And when they're not,
Well, I have them as I have them either 9 or 10. So I had them 10 this morning, but
No, I have them at 9, and I think that's where they belong. But I would not be surprised at all if they are 2 seed.
because, well, and if they, I just think it's 7 losses at this point makes it a little hard. But yeah, I mean, you could easily point out and said, well, let's see, you beat 2 number 1 seeds, 1 on a neutral court, 1 at home, and then you swept the number 5 overall seed
And beat Texas A&M.
and beat Texas A&M. So yeah,
You know, when we're talking through this seed list, I don't know that I'm really going to be surprised by a whole lot from 11 to 16. What I would be surprised by is if any of our top 10 don't end up in the top 10, because I see a pretty sizable gap from that Purdue, Iowa State, Kentucky range to the rest of the grouping here.
and I am interested to see how they handle Texas Tech, because just for the reasons we brought up, their overwhelming metrics and that huge win at Houston versus maybe not the same depth right now anyway on their profile as some of these other teams.
Well,
I thought there was already
a treatment from last year where they clearly bumped them down for scheduling incredibly poorly.
Yeah.
Graham, where do you have Arizona
Yeah.
on this list? Because you did not put them in here.
Who did I write down instead? I wrote the wrong number of somebody.
Graham, you're struggling.
What was the number that I didn't put?
He voted for Kansas twice again.
He's trying to represent both times they lost to Houston.
Here's what I'll say. If I incorrectly put the number, I would have
You got
Arizona-
A&M. You got A&M in there, and they're not in this vote.
Oh, that's the number that I put incorrectly.
All right.
Yep.
All right. That makes a little more sense for Arizona, right?
Yep.
That makes more sense.
Getting somewhere.
Actually, you know what it could be is I was telling Carrie, texted him on the side. My phone is now predicting who I'm going to rank in which positioning because it knows I keep voting the same way over and over again. So I think it must have auto generated.
Way to be involved in the conversation, Graham.
excuses.
Yeah, I got to. It's what I'm doing right now is going through and verifying all these because
I think if you would just drink 4 Guinnesses while we do this, your votes would change.
all right. I guess this is how it breaks down. Wow, can't believe this.
Marquette.
But okay,
Number
we got Iowa State was an easy number 9 overall. Kentucky was an easy number 10.
Here we go.
Then we had Arizona, then Kansas.
Yeah, Graham
Oh,
voted
I'm
for
sorry.
Kansas.
Take that back. Hold on. Yeah, that's correct. Okay, Iowa State, Kentucky, Texas Tech, and then Arizona.
Makes more sense.
And then what we got for the Fords, right? Because you were just taking it straight from this vote, right?
Yep. Let me get these in here. So are you guys discussing these? Like,
Yeah, we're pretty much, I think we're fine with the top 2. I mean, we have to finish someplace today, so we're not gonna.
Yeah, we're just arguing to vamp for you while you figure this shit out. We're pretty much okay with everything.
Yeah, I think for me, the question will be, where do we get the 13 through 16? And then do we maybe want to back end scrub 11 to 16? That would be the question.
I'm
we
good.
want to consider St. John's when Graham remembers they should be involved in the vote.
No, I wanted St. John's in, but
That's what I'm saying. Like, you're the reason we're discussing Marquette as a 4 seed instead of St. John's. It's your fault, Graham.
No, I voted St. John's earlier, but then I tried to vote them again when I didn't realize that we didn't have them in the top 16. I thought they made the top 16.
They will. Actually, that might be the team. You know, you were saying earlier that if UCLA had won at Indiana tomorrow night, if they had beaten Illinois earlier, knocking St. John's out could be their, well, we paid attention through Wednesday situation.
Yeah. Maryland gets the win.
Yes, they do. Look at my marker.
Wow. I'm surprised Marquette. I'm assuming it's Wisconsin next, but wow, I'm surprised that they edged them out. I mean, they did win the game.
All right. Graham, you said you wanted to look at the bottom tier here, right?
Yeah, I think I mean, the list looks, if this is what the committee comes up with, it will make total sense. No surprises. I think Texas Tech for me is 11th overall exactly as well. So that's kind of where I place them, but I think it's a tough team to seed. Once we get to Arizona versus Kansas versus Michigan, I feel like those three are all really tightly bunched and kind of worth some discussion here on whether we think that's the right order.
I'm surprised at Texas Tech, frankly, but I'm not voting, so.
Yeah, I think Texas Tech is a little high, but if only because of their non-conference strength of schedule.
I mean,
Yeah, I
the
just think
argument would be, I mean, their argument is the win. Basically, what they do is they come up and say, "Hey, we won at Houston."
Yeah. And their records are solid, really good records. 13 and
You know,
5.
They lost. They beat Houston in overtime. They lost by a
computer
point
numbers.
to Iowa State. They split with Arizona. Lost to A&M on a neutral court. The thing to me is, yeah, the 291 SOS, and then that early loss to St. Joe's is, if you wanted, it would be a reason to me, it's how much weight does the win at Houston carry? Does that vault you over Kansas, who played a better overall schedule?
Yeah, I mean, I actually don't like the home UCF loss more than I don't like the St. Joe's loss in Brooklyn by 1 point, because I was kind of in their backyard. But my most impressive thing about Texas Tech, and again, you would have to kind of be from the mountains or the West to understand this perspective in the committee room, or even present this if you're Oklahoma State's athletic director in the room. But to go to the state of Utah, play in altitude, and sweep BYU in Utah, BYU, a bubblish team, Utah not like more of an NIT level. That is so incredibly hard to do, and they did it, and they did it before they made their move, and then they backed that up with a top 3 net win on the road at Houston. Of course, the only team to win at Houston, plus everything else solid besides the schedule, obviously. But they were one of the last undefeated road teams in the country. And the committee always says, who did you play, where did you play, and how did you do? Even in those minimal opportunities, Texas Tech went on the road and did it in some incredible environments. And I'm blown away by that, quite honestly.
Yep, I totally agree. I think Texas Tech, what they've done on the road, is a differentiator. I'm personally comfortable with Texas Tech at 11, even though I think they're a tricky seed. Arizona versus Kansas is really interesting because both are 17-7, both played very tough out of conference schedules. To me, what I think the committee could potentially look at, though, is Kansas got a couple of good non-conference wins over Duke and Michigan State on neutral courts. Arizona kind of came up empty. They've had a little bit of an easier Big 12 schedule to start. Obviously, we know they hit that half-court heave to eventually beat Iowa State in Tucson. But winning in Tucson has really been where they've gotten their biggest wins. I'm a little concerned about Arizona not having any wins over a top 25 team away from home.
I also think, just looking at Arizona, and I know this is perhaps not exactly what they would do, but you look at the result against Duke for both of those teams and how polar opposite that result is against, the top team on both of their schedules. Arizona, what did they drop that game by double digits at home? and Kansas ended up going to Vegas and beating Duke on a neutral court. For me, I would put Kansas ahead of Arizona. I just think that is going to get a ton of respect at the end of the day. But I understand the argument against that too, or for putting Arizona ahead. But I would actually, my vote would be Kansas ahead of Arizona.
Yeah, I mean, just to echo Anthony, I mean not that it matters. That's how I came up with it. I have Kansas at 12 and Arizona at 13, just for that reason. They both played Duke. Arizona lost at home. Kansas beat them, and so many of the other things about their resumes are pretty similar.
I guess
They both played West Virginia as well, if you want to dive into that.
Well, you got that.
I mean, that's a little more obvious to me. I think a lot of teams could get crushed by Duke.
When was
to be fair, Arizona
Rocco,
also
do you
lost
know-
to West Virginia.
you know when Tucker,
Right, exactly. They did.
when the cutoff was for
Tucker
Tucker
DeVries.
leaving
He only
West
played
Virginia?
8 games.
Sometime in December.
Yeah, he only
Yeah.
played 8 games. Yeah, it was eight games in. So
I mean-
you guys
I mean,
are all right.
I mean,
There's been a little
Arizona's
bit of a
been better on the
drop-off.
road too, so that's
He's gonna
that's
get
not-
he's getting a red shirt out of it. So it's
Yeah. I guess I'll just let this go. But I you guys say, wow, what a great record for Texas Tech on the road. They beat Houston, great win in
5-1.
overtime. I get BYU's a tough place to play and stuff, but they're not a tournament team right now. Neither is
I think they
Utah.
are.
Neither is
I-
Cincinnati. Neither is Kansas State. I
think
mean,
BYU
you
will be
don't
in
you
the
don't give the
same-
Big East teams any credit for beating Villanova and Xavier on the road. I mean, those I don't see it.
I think BYU will be in the bracket tomorrow, but I still have to finish that.
Your bracket.
Correct.
Yeah, BYU will be in mine too. They'll be in Dayton, but they'll be there.
Mine,
We'll see. I mean,
I don't have many
I'm
other
assuming
options.
that.
I mean,
they're 4 seed for me.
You could have San Francisco in about 3 hours.
I think we've gotten off track here. We were kind of debating Arizona versus Kansas, right? And I will vote Kansas ahead of Arizona. I think it's very hard to believe Arizona is going to be a 3 seed when they are not top 16 in any of the resume metrics.
And if they had another win or two in quads 1 or 2, but without getting to double digits and having those resume metrics, I think that might just be a little tough to get to a top 3 seed.
And it was a 1 point a 1 point vote, by the way. So somebody could have transposed the number here. I'm just saying it was
It
very,
honestly
very
might have
close.
been me.
We'll blame
So is everybody on board with flipping Kansas and Arizona?
Yes.
I am.
Anybody opposed? Let's put it that way.
No. Anybody alive?
I think that looks better.
Yeah. I would also like to discuss, I know they're separated by Wisconsin, but Marquette versus Ole Miss. The only metric where Marquette is ahead of Ole Miss is in BPI. And if that's the only metric where you're ahead of anybody, it's not good.
I will
Yeah.
agree with
And
your statement, not your overall praise.
And I think Ole Miss's 10-point win at Alabama is way better than Marquette's.
Yeah, I mean, there's only 2 things stopping me from fully fighting this with you, Kerry. Well, on that point and on the Kansas, Arizona, like I definitely have Kansas much closer to 16 than I do to 12. I have a lot of teams above them that are not above them here, and but I always refrain because they are a blue blood, so they're going to get the benefit of the doubt on some ties in the committee room probably. That's where I always get burned. And same thing with Mr. Beard. I don't know if he's going to be getting any favors either. So a little concerned on both.
So do we need to have it unanimous to flip those 2, or are we okay with Kansas, Arizona? I'm sorry.
I don't know. I don't know how. I think more people have Kansas above Arizona, but I mean, I have Kansas number 16. They're not even close to 12 for me.
Okay.
But I don't know
For
how
me,
to-
it was more. I was promoting Kansas over Arizona, not because I necessarily think that Kansas should be a 3 seed, but I don't think Arizona should be a 3
Right.
seed.
I agree with you, Kerry. I agree with you on that one.
Yeah.
I don't
I
have a
think
problem
we have
with Kansas being a 4, but I have a problem with it being ahead of Arizona. I guess that's right. Yeah, I agree.
personally, I think Texas Tech and Kansas should both be 4s as well. We just don't have enough spots on the 4 line. That's what it comes down to me.
I think Michigan should be a 3 seed at this point, TBH.
They're close. They're very close, I think.
Well, if we're going to do this, if we're going to really scrub here, so we went down the list. We scrubbed Kansas, Arizona. Is there any play to move Michigan ahead of Arizona?
I would say yes.
I don't know.
I
I look at a team that lost to Wake Forest and Minnesota with Michigan.
yeah.
I mean,
Michigan being 1-3 on neutral courts out of conference scares me a little bit with their profile. I just think that kind of stands out amongst other contenders as something that's atypical.
We're talking non-conference involving Arizona, and they're not at the bottom of your list. What?
Yeah, but I mean, let's look at who Arizona's scheduled out of conference.
Oh,
which
their
was
non-conference
very, very
strength of
difficult.
schedule was great. They just didn't beat any of it.
I mean, we're talking, there's a big difference between Wake Forest and Xavier and Arkansas versus who Arizona was playing. Arizona went out and played the best of the best.
yeah, I mean,
Where it is.
I think this is where it's going to be really interesting for us because you could make from 11 to 14, you could put those in about any order depending on how you want to debate it. And I don't know that you're wrong in any of it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I said
I-
before there was a period of
I backed
time,
up
and
on
basically
that.
we have to what Graham said earlier. Basically, you got the top 10 and 11 to 18. Right there. I think Michigan State and Illinois seem to be clearly of that group, probably on the outside. But I mean, how much of it's recent? How much recency bias do you have too? Because that's where the thing comes in for Marquette. If you're recency bias, then Marquette doesn't look like a top 16 team in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
You can't. You
They haven't
can't be
played like
recency
that.
biased, though. Yeah.
But I don't know that the committee looks at it that way. They never have. They tried to avoid that, but every committee is different.
Yeah, I don't know. I think
Yeah.
the quad 1 category for Arizona has 14, data points. They won half of those. They got a couple decent ones on the road. They have no bad at all, and Kansas is under 500 in that same category. Obviously, 3 fewer at bats, but they also took an extra loss in quad 2, and they have a 3-5 top 2 quad record. It's just by far the worst of the mix. Besides Kentucky, who's 2-4, which is my hesitation with them.
All I know is if Arizona is a 3 seed and Memphis is not in the top 16, I'm going to do very poorly in the bracket matrix this year. Because then resume metrics don't matter anymore.
When in doubt, don't doubt the blue blood. That's the old rule of thumb. That's
Of course, is Arizona? I guess they're
Is
not a
Arizona blue blood?
no, they're like a red blood. Whatever the next color is. They're the same color as UConn.
All right, let's get back. Are we gonna switch? And I kind of agree with Dave. When we get down to the bottom of the 3s and the 4s and the top of the 5s, you can put them in a hat, draw them out, and then even if it might not be a team you could go to the resume and pick out something that's good. You know what I mean? Like
Yes.
it's that close. It is very close.
Yeah, and that's why we have to go to this level of detail.
Yeah. Yeah, no kidding. I'm just trying to move this along because it's getting late.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to get ready to hop off. But
So
Yeah, I have to hop
let's
off.
bracket.
too.
Keep
We
it,
got
let's
the
bracket.
The Dons are taking the court, fellas.
So let's finish this. Let's finish this though. Arizona, Michigan. We're okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Everybody,
Leave it.
and when I say okay, you're really upset. Okay. Michigan's ahead of Marquette. I think everybody agrees with that.
Yes.
We got Marquette, Wisconsin.
Yes.
Not
Really
so
tough
sure there.
call.
Good enough.
We know I'm anti Marquette, but I'm done. Let's bracket.
I mean, if that's how we voted, that's how we voted. I think we got to live with it.
Right.
Yeah. I'd say, Rocco, you're right. I think we're making more changes than we do in our big bracket, actually.
I know. Well, it's
right.
because we don't have enough to talk about. We have to talk about these same teams 20,000 times instead of expanding our horizons.
I know there was no WCC or any of that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's been rough over here.
Freak.
All right, let's go. Is this screen on?
Yep, we can see it.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. I didn't know where I was at on this damn thing. Okay.
All right, Auburn goes to Atlanta.
Boom.
Alabama goes to Indy. Duke to Newark, and then Florida out west.
Oh, that would be fun.
Yeah, they could if they drop one seed, they could start their tournament in Cleveland and then head to San
All
Francisco.
right, Tennessee.
Goes to East.
Hold on, let me do something here.
That'd be just realized that'd be Todd Golden homecoming.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. That'd be fun.
Yeah.
All right,
Didn't think
Well,
about
we
that.
have to win.
Houston,
We have to win 2 games first.
Midwest or South?
Midwest.
Oh, they're closer to Atlanta though.
Yeah, but we gotta look. I guess it doesn't matter.
Well, we may have to balance.
Well,
it later.
if you wanted to do it the most balanced, you'd send Houston South and Purdue to Midwest.
I just don't think they're going to do that yet. I think they'd bracket the top 2 and then make their
Yeah.
changes seeds 3 and 4.
Would they send them west to avoid the rematches or no?
Not that far down the
No,
road.
not that
No,
far
not
out.
that far down. Okay.
Who am I missing here? A&M. Yeah, they got to go somewhere, don't they?
That is wild that we could have 3 different rematches in Elite 8 games.
But right now, I'm just saying we got 12 on the West, so we're heavy there. So
That's almost, no, 11.
No, that just means Iowa State goes west.
11. Sorry.
That's 9. Or about 10. I'm sorry, I looked at the wrong number.
All right. We got Iowa State next.
So they go with what west would be the best balance for them, right? And they can't go south to
They'd
Houston.
probably go Midwest. Certainly, Indianapolis is closer.
Yeah, I
they
think
Midwest or west. Yeah.
I mean, something that could help down the road is we don't have a Big 12 team in the West, and Arizona would be the top 4 seed, so that could help with balancing if they head west.
Yeah, we're gonna have to put them west because otherwise Texas Tech and Kansas are coming, and it's gonna overload the West.
Yeah, so we could end up with Texas Tech and Kansas in the Midwest and the East, and eventually Arizona out
Right.
west.
It'd have to go. It'd have to. If you want to balance this, you'd have to go Iowa State. Jesus Christ!
Yeah, I don't know if I agree with that.
All right. Who'd you say Midwest? So what do we got? We got Iowa State. We got Kentucky.
Kentucky would have to go Midwest.
Well, if you're going to go 3, you would put Kentucky there because you're not going to put them opposite Tennessee in the same bottom half of the bracket
Right.
that high.
Yeah.
And then Texas Tech has to go east. Well, now we have a problem.
Well,
Yeah. When they move Kentucky to Atlanta, then
Kentucky has to go south.
yeah.
Yep.
all right. And who's first up? Texas Tech. So they would go there.
Atlanta, baby.
Oh shit.
Let's see if we can balance this any way, shape, or form.
To 20. I think we're pretty close. I don't think this last one's going to matter that much. Well, we got 17 here.
Yeah, they're going to have to get the weakest.
We have to get the
pull up
leftovers.
in. Looks like Wisconsin's going south.
Well, hold on. Let's do it through. So Arizona,
Arizona can go anywhere,
Anywhere.
right? Because they're the fifth.
Yeah, they should go
12.
west because they can be there since 4 Big 12 have already been bracketed.
That nice for Arizona. And Michigan.
33. All right.
Might as well put Marquette in the Midwest because the other
Michigan
ones
can
have to
go
be Big
here
Ten.
or east, or doesn't really matter. Michigan go east or south.
Right.
Well, I would put
Probably
Michigan east to
east.
balance the breeze to
Yep.
balance it.
Yep.
Yep. Michigan goes east, Wisconsin goes south, and then we send Marquette to the Midwest.
Carrie's going to send Marquette to the 5 line.
Marquette to the Midwest.
Ole Miss should be there. That's for sure.
Yeah, Marquette goes to the Midwest and Wisconsin goes to the south.
The most deserving Big East team will be the 4 seed in the Midwest. We'll leave it at that.
There we go.
I actually like Marquette. I love Cam Jones, man. I mean, if we could have put odds on this beforehand, who would have guessed it? I would be the Marquette hater and Tim would be the Marquette supporter.
Well, I'll tell you, until that 3-game win streak, I had them right at the top of the twos. I mean, I thought they were just, but I liked everybody else. They lost and shoved them away down, and
Yeah.
Then I started looking at them like, God, I think they're going to value those non-conference wins.
I did, like they're either 17 or 18 on my list, and I hated having them that low for that exact reason. I was like, oh, they were like a 2 seed 2 weeks ago. What the hell?
I just think there's a lot of love out there for hold on, let me move this up so everybody take a picture or whatever. I think there's a lot of love nationally for St. John's. I don't know if that affects anything, but
Yeah, that would be my one disagreement with this thing is I do think St. John's is going to get up there. But that's just because I think the committee's going to have a lot of respect for how close their margins of losses have been this year.
Yeah. I think it's between Ole Miss and St. John's for the last spot.
Yep.
And Marquette.
Instead of Marquette. Yeah.
Yeah. But I could easily be wrong. I'm not even saying anything bad about Marquette. They definitely should be considered. I'm just saying there's reasons to like those other two perhaps more, but it's close.
Well, like somebody on Twitter told me earlier this week, they're ranked in the top 10.
I didn't see that on the team sheet. That's weird.
Yeah, so
Joey had Michigan State at 16, and we
I
literally
saw that.
did not say a word about Michigan State this whole night.
Yeah,
well,
they
see,
got
he had
punted
room to move Marquette up there, right?
Yeah, he could.
Room to move somebody up.
Swap, so he could swap him still by tomorrow's game.
Yeah, he probably will.
All right.
All right, guys.
Hey, I really enjoyed it. I am going to get ready to hop
Yeah,
off.
thank you.
I gotta
Hey,
get
guys, that
up
was
and
fun.
I gotta get up in 5 hours. So,
all right.
Jeez, where are you going in 5 hours?
well,
Get some rest, Dave.
let's see. My wife's teacher